And
I don't know.
Sometimes they have other meetings.
Yeah,
And I thought Randy had something from 8 to 9 today.
That was Friday.
Oh, okay, sorry.
But it was 15 minutes ago. I was in my drive.
They may not have seen the email that Keisha sent or the text or whatever.
That's what I'm finance.
well, do you want me to come back?
I don't mind hearing it twice, but that's not fair to you.
It's a good question. I mean,
Is Damien coming in?
Damien's coming in at 9.
Well, why don't I get started
Yeah.
and then Damien can.
Because
fill in.
Keisha and I have heard some of it.
Okay.
So let's do it because it would be great to have the big picture, which is what we all need.
So we're on record.
We're live. Yes.
We're live,
We're on
okay.
record, yes.
So I'll put myself on record, Jane Kitchell. What I am going to outline today is a program that would complement our child care financial assistance program, which has been obviously a focus of a lot of work in health and welfare and has been driven by how do we stabilize our child care delivery system and how do we actually create the capacity necessary to provide the care that's needed to support employees and the workforce. And I've said, I believe from what I've heard and going out to communities, the 4 big things are housing, workforce, childcare, and broadband. And obviously they're all very much connected to economic development because housing, people can't move here because there isn't housing and take jobs, and broadband is certainly essential to economy. And obviously, working families need childcare so that they can participate in the workforce. And so in looking at a childcare approach and looking at the budgetary and revenue realities, we had 2 things operating at once, and I think our pro tem has been, quite clear of his concern of how much can you undertake at one time and how much revenue can you generate. And so I was trying to, think about how we could maybe connect at least the 2 initiatives. So what I proposed yesterday to health and welfare is a complementary program to the child care assistance program, which is going to, if we're really to increase the subsidy and allow, if you're paying more, then that would translate into the provider's ability to increase wages and pay professionals more. And and how we deal with the subsidy and increase the slope so you don't have so much of a cliff when people lose eligibility. And so that slope is really important. And what would be that level of reimbursement? And that's what we're working, Joint Fiscal is working on to figure out what those policy decisions would cost. Obviously, if you're going to raise the maximum benefit now, which is about $70,300 for childcare, to something greater, then you have, it affects the slope. So that's what your other committee is working on, is to figure out how to increase and raise and expand the number of households that can get assistance, because it's obviously such a significant cost of employment. And then the other is what would be the reimbursement under the CPAP program. And there are 2 groups, one of which is how many children are under age 4 and how many are above that age, because we know that infant and toddler costs more to provide simply because of the staffing requirements that go with it. So I'm looking at how to create, how to address the child care, and a lot of people, and I claim no, this is not just me, but people have been, one person quipped, gee, maybe it'd be better to pay a parent to stay home. And in fact, that is something that is exactly what this does, is it provides a parental leave. And it's a very simple concept, and it's modeled after what I did for essential workers. And you have an income cutoff and you have a standard benefit. It doesn't take an army of eligibility workers to process. And so looking at what it would be a reasonable threshold, we're proposing 600% of federal poverty. So a family of four, that's 180,000, which is a very broad net to bring in. So the first step is your household income before baby or adoption under 600% of federal poverty. If the answer is yes, then the next step is, are you pregnant? Are you expecting a baby, or are you adopting? And you have a document that's from your employer that would indicate that you're employed. And then what would be the benefit would be up to 12 weeks, which is consistent with where there's protection now under law in terms of leave. I know people would like to make it more, but some people, the employer is saying, no, I'm not extending. You have to be back in 12 weeks because I need you in the workforce. And so that's always a balance in terms of, but it's based on what exists for protection now, that 12 weeks, which Damien can talk about more.
And 12 paid weeks is something we've never had before.
No.
For
So,
families.
so it would,
huge.
it's
It
not,
mirrors the
it's
work that's
either
being done.
parent, it's not maternal leave. It could be the father paternal leave, or
It's parental
in
leave.
same sex marriages. It could be either parent, so it doesn't matter. And then the other is, it would be a standard benefit, which is like what we did for essential workers. We were looking at a benefit that would be a full wage replacement at 200% of federal poverty level, which was 561, I believe was what that would be. So the way the bill would be set up is the wage replacement would be more generous for the workers whose household incomes are low because they have very little capacity. And the concern that I've had right along is the experience in Rhode Island. And that was, unless you did a substantial wage replacement, your lower wage workers couldn't afford to take anything less than, their wages. So what was happening is you were funding and taxing under that payroll construct your lowest paid workers for a benefit they couldn't afford to take because they needed to have all the income, and they couldn't do it with a 60 or 75% replacement. So it would be 100% at the very low end, and then, but it's a standard. So obviously the replacement is the same, but it would greatly benefit the families that have the least financial capacity to have that parent out of the workforce. And the advantage of that is it's simple. 600%, you have a job, you're going to have a baby or adopting, and this is the standard benefit. And so that's the concept behind it. It's what we did with essential workers. It doesn't take huge IT systems, but it really would allow, particularly the families that have the least capacity to forego wages. But there would be the benefit if you were at 185% of poverty, then you aren't going to get a larger wage replacement or benefit than your actual wages. So it would cap out at whatever your wage was. Okay.
Yeah, 100% wage replacement.
So you don't end up having a benefit that's greater than when that parent actually is working.
So the wage replacement slopes down with
Yes.
income.
Yeah.
And what is at 600% FPL, what is the wage replacement at the high end?
It's all the same, flat.
So 561 a week is the most, and then it
Or-
just goes down.
Or,
From
you
that,
know,
is that
so
what you're
if you, I don't know, we can model different amounts.
Mhm.
We modeled the 561 because it indexed it to the 200% of federal poverty
Right.
full replacement. But you could, as long as you're capping the benefit to not exceed the wages, and you could move it up. The big question is how much money it costs, because the more you move it up or the more complexity, then you're adding costs. But in essence, what this is doing is saying, from a policy perspective, giving the parent, at least during this particularly early time after having a child, after having the baby, the option to provide the care by the parent and allow that financially to be a choice. Now, some parents might go back to work or the employer needs them back sooner. And then this is only, then at that point, if they go back to work, CFAP would kick in. And the childcare cost would be subsidized based on income. And hopefully with a better slope. And it needs to be a better slope because the more you increase reimbursement, the more that sloping, I mean, when you when you exit eligibility, then the cost is pretty substantial. Yeah. If in fact, the maximum payment now under CFAP is $17,000, that's a fairly significant amount of money. So what this is really doing is providing a parental leave benefit as part of our, but it's not part of CFAP per se. It's not, a subsidy paid based on family income to the provider. It would be a parallel program. It's complementary, but it would be much more streamlined. And I think from a fiscal perspective, and we have the chair of finance, if we're talking about all that needs to be done in childcare that people have talked about, and that is raising the subsidy, the income eligibility, and increasing the amount of payment to pay for the service, it's going to cost money. There's no question about it. And the RAND study is indicative of what it would take to move it all the way up to like 28,000. On the other hand, right now, and we're modeling it, is we pay 75% of market rate. If we move it up to 100% of market rate, then that would be around, I think it was 23,200. So
Yeah.
all of that work is still underway, but you need to know the number of kids under 4, and in order to do the kind of analysis that's necessary to price it out. But conceptually, there's I view that there's a really good nexus here in terms of allowing one of the parents to provide the care during this period of time. And it's really helpful because for 6 weeks, childcare centers don't accept infants.
And it's really nice if they can be home for 6 weeks, just to recover themselves.
Better yet, 12.
Yeah, and better 12.
Right.
So I just know that right here, the draft is saying, the benefit is yet to be determined. And the reason for that is we're still trying to do the modeling, and we're trying to come up with
They're
what
all
is.
huddled in the hall down at Health and Welfare.
And what is going to be the total cost? Because ultimately, there'll be decisions around how do we use the tax revenues that we already have? Because one of the arguments was for that childcare tax refundable tax credit was the cost of childcare. So we've had discussions about, redirecting those.
That was the prime reason, the child tax
Yeah,
credit.
and to us because of the cost of childcare. But if we're going to really do something substantial, this would be a cleaner way of doing it. But it's still going to take additional revenues. The governor's budget does have money for childcare, but then there's some money for after-school programs. We'll be looking at that because after-school programs got specifically funded with the cannabis revenues. And so it seems like we maybe would be looking at some bridge funding until those cannabis revenues came in, because it gets really complicated when you've got money here, you got money here, what does it look like? But we also know, and I'll just give you a primer on the budget, the governor's budget, while it has 56 million, I believe, for childcare and this after-school program, does not have any increase for some of our most critical services that are under as much stress as childcare. And our mental health system is level funded, which in an inflationary environment, and our SSAs, specialized service agencies that care for individuals who would have been maybe institutionalized at Brandon, those are all level funded. So in a 7% inflationary environment and with a healthcare workforce
And with
as short,
post-COVID, and the mental health crisis.
we've got some really significant budget issues, and no increases for our residential care facilities that care for our elderly or people with dementia. And so youth service bureaus that are really helpful in, dealing with our youth. We have some really significant challenges in looking at how we build a budget, and how much of the money that under the governor's proposal was allocated to childcare, but might have been at the expense of providing at least some inflationary increase to these core services. And I don't think it's any secret that our mental health system is under a great deal of pressure. And workforce for them is just as acute as any other it's as acute as in childcare, to be honest. And so that's some of the budgetary realities that we're working within as we're approaching it. So there is money in the budget for childcare, and we'll try to make sure that, that's moved. But ultimately, finance is going to have to raise some money if we're to do something very significant. And I will state again, and I think our President Pro Tem has made it clear, that you go around, our priorities, as I said, are those big four. But this is taking a piece of what I guess is in that larger family leave, but it's within the context of caring for children. And I think that the Health and Welfare Committee is looking favorably on adding this provision to the bill.
Yeah. Right, yeah, so as I think everyone knows, but for those watching, this is an amendment to S56, the child care bill, so they'll have a formal vote on it. We're getting to look at it because otherwise state family leave would be our jurisdiction. Conceptual questions for Senator Kitchell before we have Damien in the chair. Senator.
Jane, I assume that the 600% of poverty reimbursement level is all the way through as long as they're needing childcare. I mean, it's for the 12 weeks and then right through as they.
Yes. I think the childcare eligibility is, they're thinking it would slope out at 575% of poverty.
That's,
Yeah.
So
But
the 600 for the first 12 weeks. And
it's
then,
under the parental leave benefit program,
Yeah,
which is
because-
separate. They're separate.
right, but it's all part of a continuum of
Mhm.
childcare.
Yeah, yes,
So-
absolutely.
So that's why I'm asking that. just
No,
to clarify.
absolutely. This is designed to allow a parent to stay home for that period of time. But then once they went back to work, then they would be, as long as their income stayed under whatever threshold, they would then have their childcare subsidized through CFAP, and the amount of subsidy would be more generous at the lower income level and slope out as you approach the 575. But that's still pretty generous, because 600% is 180,000. So 575 would obviously, I can't do that off the top of my head, that might be about
It's a little
60
less.
or something.
Right.
It's not cool.
Yeah, so, that's sort of it. It's quite simple. It's designed to be simple, to be honest. You get into, we thought, well, maybe we should do bands and so forth. For me, the biggest priority was not to create something that in fact wouldn't allow an equal opportunity for our lower income working families.
To be able to take off a few
Yeah.
weeks and not have to leave the labor room and go back to work.
So that's it in a nutshell.
Senators?
Yeah, I just want to say I appreciate this. Thank you. And simplicity is good because it's not only good for us, I would say it's good for the public to be able to understand it and hopefully support it if it does go through.
And to minimize the cost of administering.
Right.
So with the center, and
Yeah,
Damon
that's
had
what I
the
meant by
pleasure
ask.
of working with me on, we had so many hours together on Zoom, didn't we? Oh, hammering that thing out. And we got $60 million dispersed through that program.
Oh, through the essential
Through the other
worker.
program. That's
Through that
great.
other program.
Which division administered that program? Is it the same
It
one now?
was done within AHS, and I'm
Okay.
not sure.
Okay.
And,
And that's what you envision for this as well.
well, yes.
I was hearing there's like a, new division of economic empowerment, which we should
Oh,
probably
Well,
put in.
that's in the
Okay.
bill, to
Okay.
reorganize. and
Oh, it's in
sort
the
of-
bill. Okay.
Uh,
It's like, who were they?
It is right now.
Why do we have to have names like that?
I'm not in charge of that. I know that once you get into reorganizations, that becomes very difficult.
Right.
Because I have had legislation that passed
We
this
know.
body unanimously that says the agency, as half of state government, has a scope of responsibility and complexity that is beyond one administrator to be held accountable for and to manage. We wouldn't ask the president of Blue Cross Blue Shield and in your spare time, run correctional facilities, protect children, determine eligibility, and the list goes on and on.
Oversee our motel program.
And so I wanted to reorganize to create a healthcare administration
Mhm.
agency, because healthcare, when the agency got created, and I predate the agency, just to let you know, there was no agency of human services when I started. Medicaid was a tiny little program, and the Medicaid director, we said, could operate it out of his drawer.
Mm.
And it was like, are you on, at that point, it was AIDS and needy families with children. Are you getting ABD, age of blind disabled, or are you in a nursing home? That was it. It was very easy. And now it is so big, it is huge. It is, within the state government. It's after I think,
It's a monolith.
yes, it really is. And it's so complex at this point. And when you're trying to do systems reform and payment reform, that is a huge lift in and of itself.
And
So-
complicated by the federal partners.
Yeah, so,
It's not just us. that's
so
been-
my efforts to say our healthcare programs have outgrown their home.
Right.
That made sense in 1972 or 3 when Dean Davis was governor. It doesn't work, or you're just splitting from one emergency to another rather than thinking about what really needs to be done in a longer term way. So efforts around reorganization, people tend to resist them or feel like you're just giving a new name and rearranging the deck chairs, and they're very hard to accomplish, but that's only been my experience of 100 years.
Not 100 years yet. Getting there.
So-
Try.
And this doesn't yet have an effective date, not that I'm counting I don't think I'll be eligible for this. But this, they'll have to design a form. Or do you have a sense of will we have to wait till we have money in the fund for people to start?
Yeah, that's all these, yeah.
That's all be to work out. Okay. Okay.
But
Finance has 2 days, Jane has 2 days. to
Okay.
Fix it.
Well, it's a good thing that we're previewing it in here.
Oh,
I was
You
just
made it
going
our
to ask,
witness.
did you have a meeting?
I heard
or
the weather, the roads were terrible to Waterbury.
Up north, they were.
Yeah.
Oh,
I've heard that it's the worst I've seen in a long time.
Yeah.
I
Wow.
left at 6:45.
Wow,
no.
see, it took me an extra 20 minutes in Chittenden County, but I'm
Oh,
sure it was
Geez,
worse.
compared to yesterday,
Were
I
there
had bare
accidents?
roads.
Were there
There
accidents?
were accidents,
I
yeah.
thought you-
several.
Oh,
I,
well, I'm all done, so you.
I know, right?
Fair.
I'll be in the videotape.
Oh, okay.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Senator Kitchell. And again, yeah, I mean, thank you
go back
for,
and ask Senator Mazza, how come the roads are so bad? It's not like we weren't forewarned.
They usually get better after the Colchester exit.
A lot
No.
depends on, each round of plowing takes 2.5 hours. So a lot of it depends on what was done just as you're driving through, as opposed to whether it was, 2 hours and 15 minutes ago. And
So now she's wearing her transportation.
Yeah.
badge.
Right,
Right.
So that is my new fact for the day. I did not realize we were on a 2.5 hour
That's about
rotational
what-
plowing.
That's-
Except it depends on how many plows you have, because we used to keep those interstates clear. We used to have the roads in Montpelier clear at 7 a.m.
Well, the other thing that's too is environmentally, the amount of salt and treatment on the roads has been reduced.
Thank goodness.
Well, that's true. And they now use a lot of brine because the salt would be, would scatter. And so, yes, now I have my.
Well,
thank you.
well, thank you.
Anything else you'd like me to talk about?
Jane, thank you.
Yes,
Helpful.
thanks for taking a concept, that felt just humane, to not make someone after 6 weeks give their baby over to someone else and instead be able to stay home and get back here. So we appreciate this proposal.
And Damien is, and it
Yeah, we'll
shows
have
at the top, it's still showing the 3, but, and
Yeah.
that was our original first, because obviously we've had some discussion, the chairs and with the pro tem about pursuing this, so.
I updated the header for the one posted
But,
down the hall. I'll send Scott the update.
so if you've got any complaints about it, direct it
Good,
to me.
good. Oh.
Because,
We complained to Damien too, it's fine. All right, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. We'll give our feedback to Senate Health Officer.
okay, great.
Thank you, Jane.
Uh-huh.
That is the hot spot right now.
Right, yes, that's the center here. Damien, are you ready or do you?
I am, yeah, so Scott, I just sent you a paid parental leave with an updated header.
Oh, okay.
Alex may have sent it to you already. That's the one that should be posted. So
It's an
Senator-
updated what?
it's just an updated header, as
Oh.
Senator Kitchell mentioned.
This is what we have.
This was, oh,
We could-
perfect,
We
so
could
you're
probably
good.
live with that. Yeah, I was gonna
Yeah.
say.
This is
You're
not
fine.
bad.
Yeah.
I
You're-
really
You're
don't
fine.
think-
So she had an old one from when the discussions first
I
started.
see. Okay.
And the header stayed on there
Okay.
through, 6 different versions.
It's okay, these
And I've
things
been
don't-
working with her for 4 weeks without touching that. header,
Okay.
So I apologize. For the record, I'm Damian Leonard from the Office of Legislative Counsel. What we're looking at here is labeled as two different section X's. They're for S56. Or I guess it's section X and section XX to distinguish them. It does say Child Care Financial Assistance Program Parental Leave Benefit. My understanding is that this is not going to be part of the Child Care Financial Assistance Program. That's a leftover from an early discussion, and we haven't decided what's called the program yet. Just keep in mind that it is a parental leave benefit. And so when you see Child Care Financial Assistance Program, that name is going to change. It's just a placeholder. So the benefit is for eligible parents. It's one eligible parent per family. Doesn't matter how many parents are in the family, only one is eligible to take the state benefit. To be an eligible parent, you have to, your family income has to be not more than 600% of FPL, as Senator Kitchell mentioned. You have to have had either a child born in the last 12 months, or you have to have adopted a child 10 years of age or younger within the last 12 months. And then you will also need, in order to be eligible to receive the benefit, you will have to show proof that you are either employed at the start of the leave or were employed within 30 days before the start of the leave. So, and this recognizes that not everyone who starts the leave, or I'm sorry, I need to back up, who starts receiving the benefits. I've been talking too much about the House version where the leave and the benefits are one and the same. In this case, there is parental leave, which is our existing law. So if you work for an employer with 10 or more employees who that work an average of 30 hours a week, so roughly 10 full-time employees, and you yourself have been employed by that employer for a year at an average of at least 30 hours a week, you are eligible for up to 12 weeks of job protected leave.
No,
by
But not
law.
paid,
no,
not fully paid.
But not fully paid. What this is a benefit if you're earning not more than 600% of that federal poverty level, you can use this as wage replacement
Right.
during
That's the
that
big
leave.
difference.
So this is a wage replacement program.
So maybe we need to,
Can I ask a quick question? So would this program be part of the other program?
yeah,
Part,
So,
would it be a subset of it or?
so this program right now, Health and Welfare is figuring out how to fit this into their construct administratively. The idea is that this is going to be a separate program from child care financial assistance, but they're intended to dovetail. So you get your parental leave following birth or adoption. And then when your parental leave is done, you can apply for child care financial assistance for childcare as you go back to work. So this is intended to provide that wage replacement support for Vermonters earning up to the income threshold during that leave. It can be used sequentially with your accrued paid leave through your employer. So for example, if we set, Senator Kitchell was talking about setting the benefits at something like 200% of federal poverty level or something like that.
for
So,
full wage replacement.
right. And then for folks who are earning higher, they may want to take, say they have a week of annual leave coming to them. They may want to take that week of annual leave from their employer and then supplement it with the remaining 11 weeks through the state program. So that's the way this is
Oh,
set
so
up
it's
to
only-
work. So
because
you can take up to 12 weeks.
Yeah.
Your employer is not required to keep your job
for more than
if you
12 weeks.
somehow stack together your benefits so you have more than 12 weeks.
Okay, because that was a discussion. Could I take
Yeah,
the 12 weeks here, and then if I had 3 more weeks from my employer, I suppose that would be up to your employer.
That's
Legally,
exactly
your
right.
employer, you're only guaranteed your job for 12 weeks.
that's right. Yep.
Okay.
So legally, your employer is only required to guarantee your job for 12 weeks and only if you qualify for the job protected leave. So if you're a part-time employee or you haven't been employed by your employer for a year, you're not entitled to job protection under the law. It doesn't prevent your employer from saying, I really value you as an employer, I'm going to hold your job open. And it also doesn't prevent your employer from saying, I know the law says 12 weeks, but I'm going to provide you with 16. So your employer can do that, but legally they're not obligated to. So it allows employers to say, I can't afford to hold the job open for you. Or I'm not covered by the law, and because I have 3 employees, I can't afford to hold one job open for 3 months. So it sort of keeps employers with their current job protection requirements, but it provides employees with the ability to get some wage replacement during those weeks when their employer may not be able to provide that to them through whatever benefits the employer provides.
And I know Senator Kitchell has been quite clear when we were doing doing like payroll taxes on employees, that lower income people are paying the taxes, but they can't afford that. I think it was like 2/3 wage replacement. They couldn't afford to take only 2/3 of
Right.
a minimum wage job, so that they were paying but not reaping the benefit. This one should help them the most because they will be making they will be making their
Yeah,
100% of their
Yeah.
wages.
Can I ask a question? Just how do people know about the benefit now, and would we use the same mechanism to let them know about this benefit?
So right now, it's important, there's no benefit.
Or-
There's job protection under the law.
Right, but I would say that's still a benefit. I mean, there's no
Right.
monetary outlay, but
It's a,
it's still a good thing.
yeah, it's a good thing, but it's not,
Right,
it's not England.
But how do people know about it now?
So,
Good question.
that's a great question. And I can't really speak to how many employees are aware of this or, I know internally here, we have a policy. And I think for larger employers like the state, it's common that you have a policy that dovetails with the federal and the state law. And it may be that it just provides the minimum. Some employers like the Googles of the world provide bigger leaves because they can afford to. We've had in the House on their bill, they've had a variety of employers come in, from employers who can't provide the benefits to employers who provide benefits that are similar to what's being proposed. So, and I think right now, a lot of it's through your employer or through employees who do research. I know the federal government has a handbook for employees that they put out. It's in plain language. For something done by the federal government, it's very well written. So they recently, in the last couple of years, they updated the handbooks for employers and employees to put them in plain language and really spell things out topic by topic, so you can flip to the topic that you're curious about. Because FMLA and the state law are complicated for employers to administer too. That is spelled out in Vermont. The Federal Family and Medical Leave Act, which is what I'm referring to when I say FMLA, that applies to very few Vermont employers. You have to have 50 or more employees. So for Vermont employers, we're talking, I think, in the low hundreds, if that many. For the State Parental and Family Leave Act, it's 10 or more roughly full-time employees. So that's a lot more Vermont employers, but it's still almost 80% of Vermont employers don't meet that threshold.
Right.
So we have so many small businesses in this state that are almost micro businesses on the national level that they don't meet that threshold. So that's where we've set the threshold in our state. And then within that subset, under both laws, you have to have been employed for a year, and you have to meet a certain hour threshold in order to qualify. So a lot of the employees for these employers also don't qualify. So there are these cutoffs. And oftentimes when you're an employee requesting time off for something that qualifies, the employer is the first one to say, hey, this is leave for the birth of a child. This is potentially qualifying. And now that we've triggered obligations under the law. So your HR department, your employment counsel, your supervisor, manager is the one who's got to flag it and then say, okay, what do I have to ask for? And that's especially for the smaller employers who don't have an internal HR department. That's when you're going to that handbook and saying, what questions do I need to ask? What do I have to make my employee aware of?
Is there a bottom cutoff in terms of the plan that Jane is talking about? Or minimum number of employees that qualify?
So with Jane's plan, or Senator Kitchell, excuse me, I'm trying, she needs to not be formal here from my position.
Okay, we've been talking about
This
Jane's
isn't
plan.
Zoom anymore.
With Senator Kitchell's plan, it doesn't affect that job protection. So that stays the same for employers and employees. For the employees themselves, regardless of whether they have job protection, if they're employed right before they go on the leave, they're eligible for the benefits.
And even if you have one employee, or you have to have a certain number of.
Yeah, so it doesn't affect, it doesn't affect the employer. So you could be employed by an employer that has one employee. And then you may be saying, I have to quit my job that day because I know you can't hold the job open for me. But then your employer signs a certification that you were employed up to X date. And that you submit that as part of your application.
So
And
the
as long
job
as it's
protection goes to the existing statute in
exactly,
terms of time. Okay.
yeah, so there's no change. So that's a difference. You may have been hearing about the House proposal,
Yeah.
which broadens that job protection. This doesn't do that. This sticks to just a straight benefit program, and it's a flat benefit. And it's provided.
200% of the federal poverty level at this point.
So at this point, they're working on numbers.
Okay.
So you'll see in the draft, it says TBD.
Mhm.
And that's because Senator Kitchell is working with Jim
Was the draft
Fiscal.
distributed this morning?
Yeah, I think you all got a copy of it.
Yeah, still
Um,
should be
right under your.
So,
I don't,
I don't have it.
Scott,
Oh.
you're not sure.
okay, yeah,
Did you want to look
so,
at mine?
No, I'll wait. Thanks.
yeah,
so
so
it goes
they're,
up to
on
600%,
page one,
100% wage replacement at 200%
yeah,
poverty.
so eligibility is up to 600% of federal poverty. The wage replacement will be lower per week. But and then the construct we were discussing in health and welfare is basically, it's a sequential, it can be used sequentially with your, if you have some vacation or other accrued leave
12
that you
is
can
still
use.
max.
But 12 weeks is still the max for job protection. So let me just walk
And
through.
sorry, just on the weeks, if I may, Madam Chair. If you wanted to leave work 2 weeks before your baby was due, when does the leave kick in? At that time or after the baby's been born
So right now,
or adopted?
this is silent on that. It says leave following the birth or adoption of a child. So it doesn't address what if, what if you're medically ordered onto bed rest or something like that for the final 2 weeks. And so that's something that you could add to the language. Right now, it's a very simple, it's leave starting with and following that birth or adoption.
But it recognizes that you had to be employed within 3 weeks of the birth,
Within 30 days.
within 30 days. So it recognizes that if, may not provide the finances, but if it is necessary, depending on your job and your physical ability, some jobs you can't do that last month or do safely. That doesn't disqualify you because you need to.
So I've been thinking about a lot of things that we could add. I think the sense I'm getting is you probably shouldn't do much this week before crossover, but we can keep our list of, things that feel, even if the program's simple, really critical to work out and keep sharing them with, I would think, Senate Health and Welfare, just because
They may.
the
They are working.
administration of the program will still be in AHS. So,
At the
and then I was actually, Senator Clarkson's question, I had a similar one about like, what if you go back for a couple days? Does that somehow discount you from,
So the
It's an
leave right
interruption.
now is one
It's a
continuous block.
okay,
So that is, this doesn't provide for an intermittent leave.
mhm,
It does provide for leave for a fraction of a week. understanding that children are not always born on a Sunday, so you can start the week or a Monday. And also understanding that some people may have, say, 6 days of combined time off from their employer that they
Right.
use to front load, and then they pick up from there.
That would, again, I'm looking at the time frame, and the more things we add, the more money I've got to
Absolutely.
find in 2 days.
Yeah.
We've got to find.
Right, I was gonna,
I've got-
yeah.
But again, I had somebody tell me recently they took a job here because their other job, there was no way they could leave that employer for 6 weeks for a
Mhm.
maternity leave because of, but I can see where you might want to go back in for 2 days a week.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Or work remotely from home.
Or home, yeah, because that's, which is what my Canadian daughter-in-law did. She had up to a year. It was partial, but she started working from home probably as soon as she got a night's sleep.
Right.
Right, then work, a couple of days that way.
We realize internationally, this is still way below what everybody else
yes.
does.
Yeah, I
That's what I
just
put
wanted
in
to
my
bring up-
first
Right.
maternity leave.
I know, right?
And he is now 15. Actually, he's almost 16.
Yeah, I remember signing on 14 years ago.
Yeah.
No, I just wanted to mention that people likely would, in certain jobs, work anyway, even though they're not supposed to. And so that, we should just think about that, because when someone works, you're supposed to pay them.
Yes.
But,
So
yeah,
that, I mean, we don't want people having to hide that they're
But this would be
working.
negotiable. I mean, I'm
Yeah, yeah,
sorry,
yeah.
this
I'm
is
just
this is
bringing-
something that will.
No,
be
no,
just
I'm
flexible.
writing
Just
them
bringing
down
it up.
because I'm sure Health and Welfare is thinking the same thing. And we're supposed to be thinking of this from the employment perspective and labor law, so
And then just,
eventually
and
this
then
will all
just
be
one
relevant.
other thing,
Yeah.
when you look at the financing, and you're probably already thinking this, but I think it's important that we don't disincentivize employers to hire younger people so that everybody would pay for this. You wouldn't pay more if you have employees
Yeah,
that are in categories likely to have children. You know what I
I
mean?
know, I think this is,
Blanket.
the only way I think we're gonna get this out is if it's a payroll tax.
Right,
Which,
right. I'll just take a moment to say, economic studies show that if you only offer it to one parent, and it's usually the mother, it will create, these things can have a discriminatory effect on, well, she's likely to take this leave, and it's just something to keep in mind for the future. I know that Senate Health and Welfare also would like eventually for this to be, so you could split it,
but this is either parent.
it is either parent, it just happens to be that if it's likely to be, you can only choose one
Only the
parent.
mother gives birth, so
You're-
it's more
you're
likely the
probably-
mother's gonna.
Yeah, and long-term studies show it does
Yes.
change women's,
And the other parent may well have a benefit that they're able to take
And they-
advantage
yes,
of at work.
right.
So it, this
That's
may
true.
work in concert with benefits that already exist.
right. We
You
should
may
probably just
find
look
that
at a
the
study
mother
down
has
the road.
paid Family leave from her employer,
Mhm.
and that was one of the questions, then do we pay the father to stay home?
Right, I just doubt it's 12 weeks, so.
Yeah, well, if you have other children,
Mhm.
having a second adult who can help with those
Right.
other children makes a big difference.
Exactly, yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it'd be good to have the flexibility of either parent.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's.
Yeah, so that you don't have to choose one or the other, so that one can do
It
it for
is.
1 week,
That-
or even both do it part-time.
That-
But
No, but those
that
only one.
messes up the simplicity of this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
But
Right.
both doing part-time, that's what we did. and It was
Yeah.
great.
right.
Yes, that makes sense.
So,
So, I'm just trying to think
Just
of how to
thoughts,
draft
yeah,
that, but, yeah, I mean, it certainly drafting it so that you could get partial wage replacement, similar to what we do for unemployment insurance, where to encourage, on unemployment, to encourage people to take work when it's available, you get a wage offset. But here you could basically say, if the parent works part-time, they can, you know, you reduce the benefit accordingly by the number of,
Or extend the weeks. That
or
they
you could
could,
do that.
that they could be
Yeah.
away if they were
That's-
working 2 days a week remotely, you know,
Right.
after a
I
couple of
mean, you
weeks.
could say,
You could maybe extend, but don't you think that'll all be individually negotiated with their employers?
well, so the,
Safety.
right, so the state payment is
Oh,
gonna be
right,
separate
right.
from what they do with their
Right.
employers.
Right, right, right.
So,
But I
if you
think
could,
we-
you
that
could
kind of
structure
flexibility is
the
important.
state payment to provide, you know, a total of 12 weeks of benefits within the year in a continuous block, but allow them to work part-time within that block, if that makes sense. I
With a
mean,
possible extension of the benefit according, I mean, you just,
Well,
right, so you could potentially extend payment on the benefit. It's important to note that that would drive the price tag up because you'll have,
it would be the same money. If you're, I mean, you think that, let's think that, if you're gonna take 2 days and work remotely, let's say, after a couple of weeks. Those days would add, you could be tagged on to the end. You wouldn't necessarily be adding more money, it's just extending the ability to be
What
away.
yeah,
you-
but that gets hard to administer.
well, so there'll be an administrative cost. You're also likely to have, I mean, what you see from looking at, and I'm not Joyce Manchester or Patrick Titterton, so
That's who's
I'm
huddled
not,
in the hall down
right.
there.
But what you see from looking at other states' experiences with their paid leave programs is that for parental leave, the average is not 12 weeks, even though people are allowed to take
Mhm.
that.
It's less.
The average is less, and part of that ties into what people are able to do with their jobs, what they might need to take, et cetera. And what you might see when you have it as one continuous block, and you have probably 50% of the employees who are eligible for this, or 40%, somewhere there in that range, a big chunk, a significant portion, don't quote me on the percentages, who are not eligible for job protection. They may negotiate with their employer for 4 weeks off and use that and string together benefits between their own accrued leave and the state program. If you then say you can take it intermittently, the state cost will likely go up because they'll be taking more benefits because their employer may now say, well, you can come back to work part-time for 4 weeks after that, and then full-time after that. So I can't model that for you. I don't know if Joyce and Patrick can, but I think what you're likely to see is more uptake, and that may be your goal. Just the balance is the price tag may go up. So it's not saying this is good or bad, it's just the policy balance there is, I can draft that. But you likely want to hear from Joint Fiscal about what the potential
And give,
uptake, impact, and cost effect of that would be.
and this is going to the House, and the House can also work on this.
Yes, yes.
Sure they can.
I have no worries. So the work is basically just being launched here. We have 3 days to get this out.
Understood. So if that's something that you want, I can draft that to just return us to the draft in front of us, just to hit the high points here. So,
Yeah, and then we should move on to.
Yeah.
FY2.
so the benefit amount is still TBD. The benefit would be calculated in increments of 1 full day. It's be paid within 14 days after the approval of the application or the start of the leave, whichever's later. So this allows your application timeframe is leading up to the birth or adoption or anytime during the leave. What you can't do is finish your leave, go back
then
to work,
apply.
and then apply for backdated benefits.
But that's good that you can within, so that if you just found out about the benefit, for
Right,
example.
so folks who maybe they find out while they're at the hospital.
Yeah,
And then they get home, and when they get a night's sleep, they
yeah,
file the application at that
Okay.
point. After they're settled, this allows them to get backdated benefits as long as they're still on the leave.
No, it's too early, I assume, to taken into account what the software development and what the management overhead associated with this would be?
That is, yeah, that's not incorporated into here. I don't know where they're at on figuring that out, but yeah, there presumably would be a cost, presumably.
I assume this will not start anytime during any of our lifetimes.
Oh, I assume it's gonna start next year.
I'm
Yeah,
saying based
hey.
on how complex this will be to do the IT
Well,
portion.
Actually, they're hoping that the AHS will administer it as they did the essential worker program.
Yeah,
So you
that's
missed
what Jane
Jane's
is looking
intro.
at, is the essential worker program.
Yeah, so it's a flat benefit. So it's designed to be simpler than the other programs we've looked at in the past, where it has been tied to income, and there's also been, so I can't speak to what the funding mechanism is, but this doesn't have a built-in separate funding mechanism like the past parental and family leave bills. This one is going to need a funding stream. And I can't speak to that,
Separate
but it's,
entirely then from unemployment. So labor is not getting involved?
yeah, this is gonna, my understanding is that this will be run through AHS or whatever future administrative version of that comes out of health and welfare.
And hazard pay was AHS also.
Yeah, so when we did hazard pay, that was through AHS and Agency of Administration, and they stood up the Salesforce platform. And because it you know, it's essentially, if we look at the page 2 of the draft here, to be eligible for benefits, you need an application that shows that you're earning not more than 600% of FPL. You need a signed certification that you were employed or are currently employed or were employed within 30 days of the start of the leave. And you need to sign a statement that you intend to return to work or seek work after your leave ends. So the idea is basically that you want folks to be returning to the workforce, and that this is a bridge to the child care financial assistance program for those folks so that they're continuing to stay in the workforce. This isn't someone who's going to be leaving work permanently.
So we probably just have 2 more minutes.
Okay, great. So it is a little bit simpler than the parental and family leave, where you also have medical leaves and potentially other types of leave. And then you also need to tie benefits to the wages, because this is just a flat benefit. There's no.
But is there any tie to unemployment? For example, a person who leaves employment with the intent of returning to work after the parental leave is over, is there any connection to, in effect, a no cause, a reason for leaving the job which would trigger unemployment?
So it's going to depend on the situation. In most cases, if you leave for a cause that's not attributable to your employer, you're not eligible for leave. There is a potential good cause exception if you have to leave employment because of a medical condition. So there is that potential. If you leave due to a medical condition, you lose a week of benefits minimum. You have a 1-week disqualification. The statute provides for up to 6. My understanding is the department applies a 1-week disqualification. And then you need to be able and available and searching for work to qualify for unemployment. In a lot of cases here, I think you may not qualify for unemployment insurance. But that's something that we would potentially need to discuss. But importantly, this is going to be administered separately from that unemployment benefit. So we're not going through that antiquated mainframe system. This would be a separate system, and again, because it's not income tied and it's not, except for the initial eligibility, there's the administration of it should be simpler than something like unemployment, where your weekly benefit depends on what you are earning prior to that, and the calculation is, your highest earning quarters, et cetera.
So I think, three of us are gonna talk about this in finance, and
Okay,
I just feel like, sorry, Senator Harrison and Senator Clarkson, but probably need to have questions answered outside of
We
committee.
don't know what's coming out of health.
Right, I was gonna say, the question before us right now is there anything burning that you feel like we need to tell health and welfare to change in this amendment?
No, I think,
We have a list of questions and concerns as the process moves
And-
along.
Did you want, I would just say congrats on having something simple and keep it as simple as possible. And if necessary, separate even more the payment from the leave would be my suggestions, because it already is headed that way.
yeah, so this
So,
is,
Just the more separate that you keep it. I
this
think
is
the
as
better.
separate as you can get it.
Okay,
Okay, yeah, I was like,
So-
what else?
Yeah.
Do you have something in mind that?
on more flexibility for the employee. You could just give them a set amount per week and let the employee, well, if there's two employees and two employers, let them figure out who's doing what work. So the employee doesn't have to be absent from work.
The simplest way would probably be to do it like unemployment. It's already, at least Jane has said, the benefit is not to exceed your regular salary. So
Right.
you're not.
well, that's,
you're not
Right.
gonna
and that's for
make it-
lower income.
Yeah.
200%.
Right,
FPL.
but if you work 2 days, then you get a partial payment.
Yeah, what I'm suggesting is just determine what the benefit would be for whichever parent they choose.
Right.
And then just pay them that benefit for the 6 weeks, pay the
That would be
family
the
that
simplest,
benefit.
and some
And let the
people will work.
employers and the employees work on who works which hours. And I think employers would appreciate that flexibility more too, and there'd be less paperwork.
Well,
But that's different.
for people that feel they can't leave for an extended amount of time and have the kind of job where you can zoom it in, they may well want to go back to work because they work in a place where other people depend on their job getting done.
So we can just communicate maximum
Yeah.
flexibility so no one gets
Yeah.
entangled and, people can have their own independent transition back to work, but we should move on.
So to that point, we may want to retitle it. And one of the things we talked about at the beginning was what it was called. And I think actually a wage replacement program is a better name for it. However, that flexibly is addressed instead of parental leave benefit, it is really a wage replacement program.
Or new parent support.
Yeah.
Can't get into
Whatever.
it. And it's not even our job, but people can communicate, I will communicate the title to.
Yeah, and flexibility.
Some
And
There's a lot of
because if it's a,
people giving up a lot of hope for.
well,
Right,
it's
exactly.
a question of,
There's
Okay.
a lot of letting go.
So-
And it's economic development because it would really urge younger people to come to Vermont.
Right. This is,
We should say that. No, if we have a
Certainly.
generous benefit,
right.
people will be more
Right.
inclined to come.
I think we all wish we had more time with this, because it's a moving train. But we have other bills that we had
Well, it's-
committed to getting out this week, so.
train's going in many
Excellent.
directions, because it comes from the house to the house.
Right,
This
okay.
is just the start of
This
a
is-
long train.
I did want to also, because in this hour block, we also want to get Megan Sullivan in the chair and give her a little more time to talk about. You're just speaking to 102 today, right? And you're coming back for 103, or how did we?
Oh, Wendy, we have compost over there.
So how much
Okay.
time is that? Sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, nah, I got it. I cleaned it out today too. I know, I'm sorry, this has got to walk the dog.
So 15 minutes. Okay.
Compost.
So, but 15 minutes,
I'm just confused.
15 minutes total for Megan today?
It's,
Okay, I can't like mentally, I have to go at 10:30, so I will miss that.
I can come back another time.
No, I have to go, but the committee's gonna continue.
We'll keep working.
Yes, Senator Clarkson's gonna take over.
We have
Housing
bills
bill.
in action elsewhere that we need to be.
Crossover week, so.
Oh, that one. I had a few words with Chris, but
Okay,
Ferris, but
I think we'll give you till 10:30 and give it 15 minutes and I think, I just wanna let the committee know, so it's not a surprise, right, at 11:55, I think we need to start at 8 AM tomorrow morning. We have witnesses, employment lawyers, et cetera, who want to speak, who reached out at the beginning of the week, so we're looking at 8 AM. And that might include people who didn't get to finish their thoughts today.
Right,
Okay, thanks, Damien.
great. So 102,
Yes,
all right.
so we all just got a new version that's much shorter.
Yep, so this has taken out the good cause termination language, which was 2 sections at the beginning of this. One of them was very lengthy. The chair, given the time pressure, the chair asked me to remove those sections to focus on the other pieces. So this morning, I sent 2 things to you. One is the new draft of 102. The other is a side-by-side comparison of what are sometimes called captive meeting laws. And you'll understand that a bit more when I walk through it. It compares what's in S102, currently section 1 of the draft, to what's in S106. They're same subject, slightly different approaches. So I'll walk through what's in 102 really quickly here. Section 1 would create a new section in the Fair Employment Practices Act that would prohibit employers from discriminating against, disciplining, discharging, or threatening to discipline or discharge an employee because the employee exercises a right guaranteed by the First Amendment or its corresponding provisions in the Vermont Constitution, provided that the employee's exercise of that right does not substantially or materially interfere with their job performance or the working relationship between the employer and the employer. What does that mean? So essentially what this is it would prevent an employer from disciplining or discharging an employee from speaking on a matter of public concern. This could be attending a rally at the State House, putting up a political sign in their yard, posting about something. The exception here is that if it substantially or materially interferes with the employee's job performance or their working relationship, they could be terminated. So what are some examples of that? One example of that would be, for example, an employee like me who serves in a public nonpartisan role, posting a political sign in my yard that was for or against a member of this body, or for or against a certain issue that's before this body, or something like that, or publicly speaking on, for example, Twitter, disparaging members of this body for their votes or something like that. That would materially affect my ability to do my job for you.
However,
However,
if you put a sign for a federal candidate or a candidate.
or a local candidate for nonpartisan
local
offer,
Right, a
office,
candidate that was not related to your employee, you
Right.
can do that.
right? So, and we have had instances where, for example, an employee in this building has been married to a member of the body.
It
And
has actually, yes.
yes,
Vermont.
so it is a very small state. There are complicated exceptions, but in general, you know, like all of you, I have my political opinions outside of this building,
Right.
but I don't broadcast them publicly because it would affect my ability potentially to keep your trust or to do my job for you in a nonpartisan manner, or to be viewed by the public as being nonpartisan on these issues. And so that's an example of when it would substantially or materially interfere. There are other examples, but for example, if you're speaking out publicly disparaging your employer, that substantially or materially interferes with the working relationship. And that's an instance when this wouldn't extend. That said, this is a pretty big protection, and there is some gray area in the way it's worded, which would likely need to be settled as time went on.
So, okay.
Just,
Here's-
and this might be more of a question than you can answer, but so employees don't have those rights now?
You do have,
I thought we did.
you essentially do have those rights. So for example, I can't be fired by the General Assembly because I decided to run for office in Montpelier and I staked out a position on a public issue in Montpelier. I could be fired for disparaging one of you because that materially interferes with my ability. When you're a public employer, there's a very different calculus than when you're a private employer. Public employers are governed by the First Amendment and by the Vermont Constitution. Private employers are not the government. A private employer is not required to afford you your First Amendment rights. That said, a lot of private employers stay out of their employees' First Amendment off-hours behavior. So the issue is a lot more complicated. What this would be doing is applying essentially the public employer standard to private employers.
I see. Okay, thank you.
So
That's a great way
that's
of framing it.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the best way to explain it is this would make private employers subject to the standard that a public employer is subject to, where because we're the government, we cannot come down on an employee for exercising their constitutional rights to vote for a certain candidate, to donate to a certain campaign, et cetera, unless it substantially and materially interferes with their ability to do their job.
So.
I just want to ask, so with 25 more minutes, do you want to, I just want to do a
Sorry.
time check. I think it would be really helpful in this 25 minutes to compare 102 and 106. I don't know if you want, well,
I
it's
can do
fresh in
that.
people's minds, maybe we
I can do
should.
that. Can I borrow
do
your
that.
side by
course.
side?
The side by side.
Or actually, I guess I can pull that up on my computer. So
Now, in terms of what's been taken out of 102,
Good call.
It was the good cause termination.
just that's
good
it.
cause
Yeah, it was a
termination.
big
Okay.
chunk,
That's
but
all.
yeah.
So that's solely what the. taken
Yes,
out.
yes.
So
Non-competes was in the other. That's been taken out.
both of these bills. So 106 does not have that provision in it. That's a major difference
Right.
between the two.
Great.
So 102 has that provision extending essentially the requirements for a public employer to private employers. 106 and 102 both have provisions that would provide that an employee can't be penalized for declining to attend an employer-sponsored meeting that has the primary purpose of communicating the employer's opinion on a religious or political matter.
Right.
Regardless of whether the meeting is with the employer or an agent or representative of the employer. So for example, an example of this would be an employer that has a candidate for a political office come in and then requires all employees to attend that
And
meeting.
that's only in 106.
It's in
No,
both.
It's in both,
So
okay.
this is where they're similar.
Yeah,
106 doesn't have this
The extension of
the
the public.
extension of the public employer
Right.
requirements around First Amendment
okay.
practice to private employers. Private employers have more flexibility to say, your speech outside of work is causing problems for us, and we don't want to keep you on staff.
Senator Kemp.
Okay. So I'm a member of the public. I work for fuel oil dealer
Okay,
and I am out rallying for S5.
right.
My employer thinks that that bill, at least from all the emails I've gotten, gets passed. They are going to be financially penalized and hurt, can my employer,
Make you attend, or is that?
no, not tell me, I don't want you out rallying for something that's going
To impact
to
our
impact,
business.
Oh,
impact my
positively-
business, yeah,
Positively rally.
yeah.
Substantially or materially interfere with
So-
my company's.
That- yeah.
Under this,
Even if it's
under this
misinformation.
construct, so right now, your employer, you're an at-will employee. So your employer could dismiss you. They don't have to tell you why.
Right.
It could be related to that. It could be that you've been late making your deliveries or whatever it is that you
My
do for them.
cousin needs a job.
Yeah, it could be any number of things. Under this, if you believed it was because your employer saw video of you attending the
Whatever rally.
S5 rally
Yeah.
or whatever rally it was, you could argue my employer fired me because I was exercising my First Amendment rights. That's prohibited. And so, and then your employer would have to defend against it. And the argument would be, does this substantially or materially interfere with your ability to do your job or your relationship with your employer? You might have a claim, the employer may have a good defense there in that
That's what
case.
I'm thinking, yeah.
Because you're advocating for something that is directly against your employer's interests. It does get really sticky though, because you've had cases where teachers have been advocating for a change in the school district that the school district administration doesn't support. And the teachers have been vindicated in that issue. So it becomes a very fact specific.
Or they go out and strike. I mean, they.
Well,
Yeah.
that's a different issue.
Right.
Okay, this
That's
doesn't
protected
affect,
elsewhere.
this doesn't affect private sector employees' rights under the
They're
National
public
Labor
sector
Relations
employees
Act.
anyway.
This is gonna
Teachers.
extend those
Oh, I'm
public,
clear on what
right,
this does.
yeah.
I was just thinking.
So, yeah, your collective bargaining rights and your rights to collective action for related to
To
working
work.
conditions are very different
Right.
than your public speech on a matter of interest to your employer.
Like what books should be banned in the library?
Or just coming out strongly on an issue that your employer disagrees with.
My
your
employer
employer's coming
doesn't
out
want to
against.
ban books in the library, and I think certain books should be banned.
Yeah, there could be any number of things, or supporting a controversial candidate or a controversial political group. Right now, your employer has more authority to address that. They may not than a public sector employer does, because public sector employers are subject to First Amendment restrictions. This would extend some of those restrictions. The other pieces of this, so this is not an S-106. S-102 and S-106 are identical in the pieces that would prohibit employers from penalizing employees for attending meetings where the primary purpose is to share the employer's view on a political or religious matter, or to view or participate in communications related to a political or religious matter.
So the first
And-
sentence are all the same.
Right, so 2 and 3 and 102 are substantially similar to A1 and 2 in 106. The wording,
Just say that again.
so A2 and 3 and 102
A2 and 3.
are substantially similar to A1 and 2 and 106.
Okay,
The wording is a little bit different. But we're talking about differences in degree
Okay.
versus a substantial difference. A1 in 102 is just not in S-106.
And that's
So-
the private.
That's the First Amendment piece.
Right. A1.
so this unique,
Forget the numbers.
this is,
Yeah.
Right.
that's not a one.
It's the
Right.
concept.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
so it's that
This is
First
right.
Amendment concept
It's-
is not in 106.
It's extending the public employer, the
Right,
limits or
And-
responsibilities to private employers.
yep,
Okay.
And this is what's left of the, right, yeah, just at will termination, or
The
the,
good cause
you have,
termination is out.
yes,
of the-
that's out.
Yes.
The one,
These are 3 other pieces.
this
that
is,
are in the-
but this is saying, but, so your employer can let you go at will, except he can't let you go
Right.
because he doesn't like the fact that you were at a political rally unless it was impacting his interests. But,
Right, yeah, the
yeah,
rest are
so
kind of
this is saying under
Yeah.
these circumstances, it isn't an at-will
Right.
termination.
So the,
Correct.
yeah, so
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
issue here really gets into, there are really two issues. The first, which is only in 102, is this issue of your First Amendment expression outside of work. And it's extending the First Amendment to private employers in a way that it doesn't apply to them now. So it's an additional restriction for them. The second issue here is, do you want to restrict the ability of employers, public and private, to require employees to either attend meetings or view communications that express the employer's position on a political or religious issue? I'm looking at this now and realizing that, well, fortunately on your printed copies, the headings stayed there. On my copy, they didn't. But as you'll go down, you'll see I put a heading on the side of this side by side. So the next piece is, what are the exceptions to this?
Yes.
And there is a little bit of a difference here again as well. So in 102, the exceptions are that this doesn't prohibit an employer from communicating information that's required pursuant to state federal law. Bless you. Or information that's necessary for the employee to perform the employee's job functions or duties. It also doesn't prohibit an institution of higher education from communicating with an employee regarding an academic program, symposium, or course, or casual conversations between employees or between the employee and employer, as long as the employee is not required to participate. So in other words, this doesn't affect water cooler conversations, as they're commonly referred to. It doesn't prevent an educational institution from having a symposium on a controversial topic, or from having a controversial speaker attend. And it does not prevent an employer from communicating, say, a requirement of law that the employee may find politically abhorrent. So say the employee is strongly against a new law that went into place, the employer still is required by law to communicate those requirements to the employee. The employee can't say, you can't tell me that because politically I strongly disagree with that. It's essentially protecting employers from doing what they're required to do under the law. In 106, all of those protections are there. It also adds, 102 and 106 both have a protection for religious institutions communicating about religious issues. If you work for a religious institution or organization, you should expect that you're going to be communicated to about their views on a religious issue. So there's a clear exception there. 106 adds protection for political organizations communicating about their political views. So if you've chosen to work for a political party or political advocacy group, you should expect again that your employer is going to have meetings expressing their viewpoint on political issues, whether you agree with it or not. And then the other thing that 106 allows.
This seems like so obvious. So,
Right.
I mean, I hate to say it, but do we really need to put this in statute?
You would, because otherwise the
I mean, it's-
language in the beginning would arguably prevent
Oh, I see.
and allow someone
So-
to say, I know I work for such and such religious organization, but I don't agree with them. I just wanted the job. And they had
Well,
good
that may be the
benefits.
case.
That might be the case, but you cannot then go on to claim that that organization
Got it,
can't have me
got it.
attend a meeting where they talk about, I'm sorry, I grew up Catholic, so the word that's coming to my head is catechism. I know that's not the language or the word that applies to all religions, but their religious teachings or something like that.
Right, got it.
So
It just seems so.
You can't
obvious.
object to the crucifix in the front of the classroom.
exactly. or to a prayer offered at the start of meetings or something like that.
Right.
The next piece here that 106 provides an exception for is the employer is allowed to offer meetings, forums, and other communications at which attendance or participation is voluntary. So the employer could say, I'm having this political speaker come, you're not required to attend. But if you want to, you're welcome
Can
to.
they say, if you come, we'll give you
A bonus.
a bonus of some kind?
That gets a little bit stickier
Yeah,
because the language at the beginning here provides that the employer cannot discriminate against an employee as a means of requiring
okay,
an
so
employee.
if,
So you can't offer discriminatory bonuses for attendance. You know,
Okay.
I'm gonna give you $50 if you attend this
Yeah.
meeting with the candidate I support. Or if you go to that fundraiser that I'm hosting, or whatever it is. So that, and then the penalty and enforcement provisions are identical and the definitions are essentially identical. There's slight wording differences, but they are essentially identical. Because of time, I'm not going to go deeply into those, but suffice to say, it prohibits retaliation and provides a right of action through either the Attorney General or civil action for a violation. Turning back to the 102 draft, the second section here. So the second section here, the first section would be a very big change for employees everywhere. The second section would allow two categories of employees who currently don't have bargaining rights under the National Labor Relations Act to have bargaining rights under our State Labor Relations Act. Those are agricultural employees and domestic workers. That is what the second section does. Again, it's a big substantive change, but it's a pretty simple section. We're striking them from the excluded categories of employees, so they would implicitly have bargaining rights now under state law. Sections 3.
Do we define domestic workers?
We,
I mean, domestic workers, are those housekeeping in hotels? Are
So
those
currently-
cleaning people? Are they what?
it's domestic service in a home. So these are
you're made.
au pairs, maids.
That's gonna be so tough for us.
So right now, au pairs, maids,
Can I
nannies,
get covered under
cooks,
that?
anyone who's employed in or about a private home does not have collective bargaining rights under state or federal law. This would give them collective bargaining rights. How that would apply would be, that's probably a longer discussion.
Yeah,
That would
I mean-
apply. There are very few homes that would have more than one person. So the question is whether you're hiring through a service where the workers are unionized.
Well, but also it assumes that domestic workers are paid above the table, when sadly a huge percent are already.
Right, and
I mean,
that's
it's very challenging, I think, the domestic workers, and it now includes home aides. I mean, there's so many home aides who are not part of an agency and are paid.
Well, that's
The-
what I'm wondering,
Yeah.
going back to the childcare workers and a realtor.
so,
You can't, we had to give them permission to talk together because you can't,
so the independent direct support providers, so those are the folks who are paid through the Choices for Care program. They are covered by a separate collective bargaining law because they're paid through a state reimbursement.
There are tons of people who are not under those programs, who are paid privately, not through programs.
And those folks would potentially have rights under this.
but can they talk to the maid next door and say, geez, I'm getting $20 an hour, what are you getting? Well, we'll get together. There's a federal,
So-
realtors cannot ever say to each other, this is what we charge, you know, as our fee.
Right,
Because that gets to be price setting. So it's published, everybody knows what the, you know, your commission rate is. But you can't ever as a group sit down and say, oh, we're charging this.
right. So we're getting a little bit far afield. So that
Okay.
gets into more of an issue of collusion
Yes,
and anti-market action,
right.
which gets into antitrust laws and so forth. Realtors
Yeah,
have historically been excluded from a lot of employment
yeah, we
laws
had a really
for-
good lobby somewhere.
for a variety of reasons.
I'd like to change
Agricultural
some.
labor and domestic labor have also been excluded. Under our state law, we've excluded them from labor relations. They're also excluded under national labor relations because they are not covered under the federal collective bargaining law. The state can extend its collective bargaining rights to them. The extent to which there's an employer-employee relationship where you have collective bargaining, one of the important things in the State Labor Relations Act is it only applies to employers with 5 or more employees. So if you're a household that employs 1 worker, you're likely not covered anyway.
Right,
If you're a household or if you are in a domestic work setting where the workers are employed through an employer that employs more than 5 workers, potentially you have collective bargaining there, but you're unlikely to have an issue where the maid from one house or the home care worker from one house talks to the care worker from down the street.
right. So how does, I'm trying to understand, so those individual workers,
They are
They
still
are-
unlikely to
they
have
are-
collective
they
bargaining
are not
rights.
going to have any kind of,
Yeah,
because that was the
unless
issue with
there's-
the childcare workers. They
Yeah.
couldn't talk to each other about forming a union. And the state had to assume the supervision so that they weren't price setting, because they wanted to negotiate with the state over the
yeah, and
CCFAP.
yeah, and that group has actually still not unionized.
No, I
They have the
know,
right
after
to,
all that
but yeah.
Agony, they couldn't get the vote to
So
unionize.
you're more likely to see an effect here with the agricultural labor
Yeah.
addition for the agricultural operations that have more than 5 employees in the state.
Okay, so,
And this does not distinguish between workers who are here legally, workers who are here on a visa program, and workers who are here on an undocumented basis.
okay, so
And I-
the
yeah.
Jamaican apple pickers that come in
they're on an
and they're on,
H2A,
yes.
they could potentially try to unionize under
Okay.
this. H2A presents all sorts of difficulties for that, but potentially they could unionize. You also have workers who are here on an undocumented basis, who potentially collectively bargain. And then workers who are here on a completely above board basis that's not through a federal visa program could also potentially collectively bargain under this, provided the agricultural operation has at least 5 employees. So
And is it 5 full-time annual
it's
year
just
round?
5 or
just
more
part- Okay, so
employees.
part-time,
Yeah.
seasonal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, so it gets more complicated when you're seasonal, because then you've got this fluctuating. But you could have a collective bargaining contract with your seasonal pickers if it's the same group every year.
Okay.
So,
And it might be the bargaining for clean water or,
yeah, it's
A roof
not
that
just
doesn't
wages,
leak,
it's conditions in terms
Yeah.
of employment. So that's section 2. Sections 3, and I'm trying to be conscious that my time is up.
5
Sections 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 are all what are commonly called card check. So these would affect collective bargaining under the State Employees Labor Relations Act, Judiciary Employees Labor Relations Act, State Labor Relations Act and Municipal Employees Labor Relations Act, and allow basically a majority sign up or card check election. So instead of going through a formal election and campaign period, if you have 50% plus one employee in a bargaining unit sign up and designate the union in their sign up, they would, that union would get certified as the collective bargaining agent without an election. So we've discussed this in prior bienniums, but the concept is pretty simple. Right now, you first have to do this petition. Then there's a period with an election at the end of the period. This allows you, if you get, say you've got 10 people in the unit, you get 6 to sign up and designate local whatever as their bargaining unit, their bargaining agent. They would be certified as a union workplace, and that agent would be designated as the certified bargaining representative. So,
And remind us why it's called card check, which doesn't make it.
So card check, historically, what you would do is sign cards saying you were interested, and they would collect cards, and then you would count up the cards. And so you would check the cards to make sure it's a valid signature, not Mickey Mouse or JFK or something like that. So you check that it's a valid signature of someone in the bargaining unit. And then if you get to 50% plus one, majority sign up makes a lot more sense from a understanding standpoint, because now you're signing the petition, designating, saying that we want to collectively bargain and we want this organization to represent us.
And a counter argument is that the employer doesn't have any opportunity to counter arguments that may be false or that may be misleading that are presented to the employees in a private setting, which is a single side involvement in terms of getting the employee to sign.
Under the current process, there's a period for the employer and the labor organization to make their case.
Correct.
And then at the
And
end
this
of that,
eliminates
there's
that.
an election.
No, this doesn't.
No, this
eliminate
doesn't
it.
eliminate that.
Well, it
So-
effectively does if the employer doesn't know that the cards are being collected and circulated and signed.
But they're not doing the cards anymore.
So,
The
well, they
effect
still have a
is
The
petition.
petition.
I mean, that's a
so-
counter argument.
I think to be careful here not to put my finger on the scale, I don't want to argue about
Right,
who has a better case. What this eliminates is that campaign period.
right.
Oh,
So
But
it
it does-
eliminates the campaign period. I would let the representatives of the labor organizations and the businesses make their arguments to you about whether this tips the scale.
Yeah,
Because I think if I try to wade into that, I'm gonna misspeak or misstep.
Right.
And come down on one side or the other. So, right. Fortunately, you guys are forgiving when I put my foot in it.
You so
but-
seldom do.
so
But yeah,
we're
so,
just eating into people's breaks now because we are gonna get maybe
Right.
15 minutes.
so there's really 3 big things here. First is constitutional,
Mhm.
the sort of speech rights
That's
and
what I was
the
gonna say.
meeting.
Yeah,
The meetings, the
First
the
Amendment.
captive meetings, First Amendment and in captive meetings. The second is bargaining rights for agricultural and domestic workers. And then the third is this majority sign up piece.
so that's a better name for it.
It's
You know,
just-
the
it's
card check is
more
like really
clear.
old.
But yeah, card check is a really antiquated term.
I would really.
There's a lot more depth to it than just majority sign up, but that's a clear idea of at least what the mechanism is.
So I'm gonna say now, we can eat into the break, or people can get amendments and changes to Damien for Thursday, Friday. I mean, we're gonna have other people come in on the
Yeah, do you,
substance of the issues, but,
I think until we hear from, make sure we hear from everybody.
right, but we're not doing title changes right now, so if you
Oh, I
wanna propose that at a later time, we can, but we just don't have time for
Right,
like small changes right now.
that is, I just said that I didn't,
Okay,
like,
yeah.
I'm gonna go
So
down that rabbit
I
hole.
should probably yield to your other witnesses, so
okay,
you can hear from them. And I think you guys have me back, potentially if there's time after Director DeRocher later.
okay,
And I am available the rest of the morning, so I'll stay here for your other witnesses. And
Yeah.
then
I think that's good because it might
Yeah.
shape up changes
Yeah.
people want to make or whatever, but you don't have to, I will say, people don't have to tell me if they are introducing an amendment they think might, change the nature of the bill. If you have some kind of technical or friendly or clarifying amendment, please try to let me know. And then if anyone watching has something materially about S-106 that they want to see in S-102 because they don't think it's covered with the section on religious and political meetings, they also should let us know by Thursday that they have
So is it
something.
the intent, is it your intent to deal with S-102? And again, assuming the committee was in favor of it, not do 106?
That's right, yes,
Understood.
absorb. that.
Anything we need to want from 106 that isn't in, now's the time to include it.
Yeah,
Okay, that's
and
helpful.
the intent overall is to vote on 102 on Friday.
102 on Friday.
As
Megan,
amended.
very well could be.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me this morning and making the time. It's greatly appreciated. So for the record, Megan Sullivan, Vice President of Government Affairs for the Vermont Chamber of Commerce. To start off, just say we appreciate that the first or major section of 102 has been removed. I think that would probably have required a great deal more time to talk through the many provisions in there. Happy to talk about that at a future date if it comes back, but we'll focus comments now on the new draft, and we'll jump right in on that. So the first section of the remaining 102 that deals with employee speech, I would love a clarification if this is just outside of work, because it reads to me that it would be inside or outside.
It does potentially apply to speech inside of work
Right.
if it doesn't meet that materially and substantially language.
So I think a few examples that are worth the committee thinking about on this. Certainly a Vermont example, at least in terms of, or the first is an Vermont example is when a restaurant in the state had an employee who on their own time attended the January 6th insurrection. And he was identified as attending that. He was identified as an employee of this establishment. And it was very problematic for the establishment, and the establishment ended up terminating his employment there because of that. And I think that, potentially could be challenging here. It didn't affect his work performance, but was a serious issue for the employer because of the
Yeah, that's, I think sounded like my question with the fuel oil employee. I
very
would-
similar, different
yeah, I
type
would
of
assume-
rally.
Yeah, that there was a threat of lost business
Right.
because this guy worked there, or girl, whoever. So I'm hoping that would get covered under that material, what was it, David, material effect or?
So the substantially materially might cover that. But there's an argument, if it's not affecting the employee's work, and it's not directly related to the employer's interests, is the fact that some customers may not want to frequent an establishment that employs that individual or may not feel comfortable coming there.
Okay,
Is that substantially materially affecting? And so you get into an issue of fact.
and then I get to, some people don't want to come to an establishment that has openly gay or lesbian, LGBTQ folks wait
Right.
as a wait staff. Okay, so
And
that's,
so, yeah, and it's important to know here that when you have an issue of, for example, someone who's openly LGBTQ Plus, they're a protected class against discrimination, so your employer can't fire you because of that. So we're talking about speech on an issue
This is a good example.
versus
Yeah,
having a specific characteristic as a person.
Okay,
And so the issue here is more that you're talking about speech on an issue, and the employer might prevail in that case, but I don't think I can say 100% that they would.
okay,
In the case
Because
of
these
Megan,
cases-
that
Yeah.
Megan brings up.
Yeah, these cases are complicated.
yeah,
And, you know, it's really hard without knowing all the facts and without knowing who your judge is, et cetera, exactly how it's going to come out.
okay,
And even if you think you have a slam dunk case, when you've got a case where it's fact specific and then it's applying a lot of the facts, there's always a chance that something comes out in trial or gets or isn't admitted at trial because you got it the wrong way, or
okay,
it's, you know, the judge makes an evidentiary ruling and then your case falls apart. So that's one of the things here. I just can't
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
predict that.
but that would be impossible if it were,
The employer would have an argument.
yeah,
I can't guarantee whether it would
right,
fail.
no,
but it's
but
a concern.
yeah,
And I think in terms of speech inside the workplace, places where the federal government, I think, has sort of flipped on this a few times, as it relates to union organizing, but I think broader than that is, you know, if you work for an employer that requires a uniform, and an employee shows up in a shirt that may have, opinions expressed on it that is not the uniform, is that now protected here, saying, I don't need to wear your uniform because my free speech says that I can wear this other shirt that is expressing other political opinions that you may disagree with.
some,
And so there's been federal discussions on that in terms of, can you wear a shirt with your union logo versus the shirt that your employer has asked you to wear? But in terms of, I think there's, outside of that union shirt, there are other opportunities where those.
So that's a question of condition of employment. If wearing a uniform is a condition of employment, doesn't that qualify as something that free speech wouldn't impact?
Well, so right now, as it's a condition of employment, and provided it's not the issue that Megan's brought up is a good one, because under the National Labor Relations Act, your speech is protected on discussing issues related to workplace safety and conditions. And that's where this union logo issue goes back and forth. Is that a discussion of workplace conditions? Or does that get into some sort of political messaging? The difference now is when you're talking First Amendment, now that can extend to, you know, wearing something, whether it's a shirt or a button or something like that, supporting a candidate at work or supporting a particular issue, and your employer may not be comfortable with you doing that because it may put off some of the clientele, et cetera. So that's kind of the issue here, is right now as it's worded, First Amendment is broad enough that unless your employer can show it substantially and materially interferes, it could apply in the workplace. So it could apply to supersede that condition of employment, because my First Amendment right to speak on an issue of public concern is protected versus, so you could clarify this to say First Amendment speech that occurs outside of the workplace and outside of working hours.
yeah,
You could clarify it to say that, and that would narrow it down. And then you still have this question then of the January 6th, or the climate rally or whatever it is.
but then could wear a t-shirt that said, "Go Brandon," but in the words that Go Brandon actually said, every time I drive to my daughter's, I have to go buy a flag with those sentiments on it. That's free speech. But could I wear a t-shirt that had words that quite a few of my customers or coworkers might find offensive?
So again, it gets to that substantially and materially interfering with the, let me pull up the exact language here so I don't misquote it. But it's, yeah, so substantially or materially interfering with the employee's job performance or the working relationship between the employee and the employer. Your employer, again, could make the argument that that substantially and materially interferes with job performance or the working relationship between the employee and employer. You may have a counter argument that, you know, this is, again, this is an expression of, you know, a political opinion. It has nothing to do with my job as
I don't think I'd get away with wearing that t-shirt in here.
No, I don't.
Right, and you know, so it does become fact specific based on the job. Clearly, for example, an employee in this building, that would go, you know, way beyond what does substantially materially interfere.
But
in a
even as an
different job,
elected official, there is a certain expectation. I mean, I could
it's up to
stick,
your voters.
Yeah,
so I
I
could
mean-
wear
but Randy couldn't wear that t-shirt on the Senate floor without a jacket.
and a
But I could wear
tie.
this
And a
tie.
Right,
You notice it's that.
those are rules of decorum.
We like-
What is your tie?
There are lots of other pieces I'd love to get to, so.
Yeah, so
uh,
we only have 5 more minutes.
I know, so, we just, okay, but those are questions we have on that section.
Those are,
On captive audience piece, you know, I think we have worries, you know, generally about saying if you're being paid to be at work and you're being, you're all at the hours that you're being attended, you can choose to not go to meetings that you've been required to go to. And especially because the language here seems very broad, and what is a, you know, expressing a political opinion, what could be included in that world? What would various employees with lots of different opinions, how would they interpret that? And I think there are some legal challenges to captive audience laws that are going on now that are worth considering, that I think could apply to this. So Connecticut has passed a captive audience law that seems very similar to the language in
in this.
102. And the Attorney General there said, I know this is going to go to court and we will pay the money for this to go all the way through court. And it is being challenged in federal court by a number of federal organizations who are challenging it under Section 8C of the National Labor Relations Act that protects an employer's right to express views, arguments, and opinions so long as such expression contains no threats of reprisal or force or promise of benefits. So saying that the captive audience law that the state passed is not, that the federal law supersedes that, and this can't be enforced. The other piece that it cites is the First Amendment rights of the employer. And that piece has created the Florida captive audience law, which is very different in intent, but I think could be problematic with the language in Vermont in a similar way, where someone, an employee could say, it has interaction with 103 as well, that, you know, I think that this harassment training, I think that this DEI training, I think that this ESG training is political. I don't agree that this is not political. This listen to certain political figures who say that this is all political, and I'm not going to these meetings. And Florida's captive audience law sort of specifically said employees don't need to go to those types of specific meetings. And there was an injunction on that law being moved forward because
There's a stay of action on it.
yeah, because they said that Florida argued that the First Amendment right of the employer was just to hold the meeting. That met their First Amendment right. And the First Amendment right of the employer was the meeting, not just the fact that they could hold the meeting and what they said at the meeting. And then employers could mandate that employees could go to those meetings. So I think, those are concerns in this, what is the intent of this language? And then how broadly could it be widened?
I think the intent is clear, I think what your concern is that
The language I think is not as clear if, where political opinions could be expressed and what the definition of political is. That it could be that if, employers are really trying to do good work around DEI, around harassment and discrimination, that are not mandated by the state, but could be interpreted by employees who disagree with those
right.
those intents as saying those are political meetings and I am not going to attend them. And the employer has no recourse. They can't.
So the pendulum can swing both ways.
It can swing both ways. And it has, and Florida swung the other way. And
So you're feeling that the definition on page 3 of political matters, that's where it comes down to, is sort of the religious matters and.
yeah, I think
So
it's broad,
identify-
and I think if we're just talking about union organizing, I would caution that we may want to see what happens with the Connecticut rule, where they've said that this is does not that federal National Labor Relations Act supersedes this law, and that the employer has the right to talk to the employees as long as it doesn't have threats of reprisal or force promises of benefits.
Okay, I haven't been here in the past when you worked on this, but right now, the complaint seems to be that the employer has a lot of power to buttonhole, to require people to go to anti-union organizing meetings. And some people would say the employer's just telling them the financial truth of what this is going to be. And others were might say this was a threat. However, I guess the unions can have meetings, but they can't. Well, I don't know. If you're a union
That's
member,
dangerous.
can you be forced to go to a union meeting?
I don't know.
I don't think so. Before there's
I don't
a
think you could be
union, you
forced to.
can't, but they most certainly can buttonhole people.
So,
Yeah.
with unions, we do have different standards under the NLRA and under the state laws. So the state laws, because they apply to public sector employees primarily, again, you get into that First Amendment issue. The state cannot require an employee to join the union, to pay union dues, to pay union service fees, because all of that is considered speech, and we cannot require employees to engage in that speech, even if their bargaining unit is unionized. Under the National Labor Relations Act, an employer and the labor organization could bargain for a closed shop or something like that, where everyone has to be a member of the union to work there. That is a different scenario because it's in the private sector. So, and I'm not as familiar with what the NLRA provides around employer meetings and employee meetings on this and what the employer can require. I do know that the employer and employee organization can bargain for something like a closed shop. I don't know how often that happens anymore, but you can do it. You cannot do that under the public sector laws in Vermont because of the First Amendment issue.
I was on this committee when we passed the union service fee, which we lost in court.
Yes.
Having lost in court on a bill that finance passed, it was extremely expensive. It had to do with data mining and pharmaceutical
I
companies,
recall.
but it was very expensive to defend. So depending on, yeah, I mean, the state
So,
defended it and it cost a lot of money. So I guess the goal of this is to establish, I assume, a level playing field and to make sure that employers and employees have the same balances. I also don't think anybody should get religiously or politically proselytized
by their employer.
or their coworkers.
Well,
I
no,
do not
the
want to be
106
sitting next to someone who keeps inviting me to go to their church and doesn't take no for an answer. Or telling me their religious beliefs.
Right. So I think the intent is clear, whether we need to, as a result, Damien, you must know about the Connecticut lawsuit and how we could tighten it up in regards to that.
I have not had a chance to look at what's going on in the courts around these laws, just given the workload this session. I
Yeah.
haven't had much downtime to do that, but I can
Yeah,
look at
and
that
it's been
possibly.
moving.
It's new, it was
Yeah.
filed in November of 2022,
Just
so.
understand that it essentially says that the NLRB's rules supersede state law.
The NRLA,
Or,
yeah,
excuse me,
yeah,
NRLA
yeah.
supersedes state
That
law.
there
with
is,
respect
there
to-
is a provision of that guarantees that allows the employer to hold mandatory meetings that meet certain conditions. And outside of those certain conditions, if the meeting ventures outside of those conditions, then they've broken that law. But inside of those conditions, and it also argues on the First Amendment rights of the employer, which is what the Florida law also
Now,
was
that
challenged by.
Also, I think it goes without saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, that and also the mandatory meetings that may exist prior to, if this law were enacted, that in Vermont, must be paid meetings. In other words, you can't have somebody go,
Right,
the employer can't require somebody to go to a meeting without paying them for their attendance at that meeting. Is that correct?
Right, I think that's the difference in those examples, is
Yeah.
that the meetings we're talking about are during the workday
Mhm.
when the employee is getting paid.
Yeah.
And if they are saying, I'm not going, geez, that DEI meeting that's happening all day Thursday, on this beautiful fishing day, I'm not going to that meeting. There's nothing else for me to do, so I guess I'll take the day paid. These are the concerns of saying, how far can this be interpreted?
Yeah, I don't think that falls under the two issues that are primarily drawn. I mean, it's not a matter of opinion. Some of those, I mean, they're,
It's not a matter of your opinion,
So,
but I think we've seen the law passed in Florida that specifically said employers cannot mandate employees to go to meetings that talk about race, that talk about gender. There are
Equity in the
other
workplace.
opinions, other ways that people interpret
Yeah.
those
Right.
opinions. They may not be the ones that we at all agree with, but
well,
I
they
think
may
we
not
need
be
to be
considered
cautious.
political by many. I mean, right, they are
Well, they're
equity
political
and
views, and again, whether you agree with it or not is something else.
Yeah.
But we're talking about political views.
But it can, in protecting political views,
Mhm.
or we may think we're protecting our views, but
or
if
rights.
somebody else becomes the power structure, then their views are, so you just need to make sure that it can swing both
True,
ways.
that the law is
Florida's,
truly neutral.
yeah,
Right, and tight the language tight enough so that we are clear, and that we are clear with the intent and the language. You have 5 more minutes, so
And
what else
I
do you
would,
have?
I would look at that Connecticut action and
Right.
maybe we're talking the Attorney General about what
Can
Yes,
you
we have
give us-
not.
could be facing
Give
if
us-
this
Have
is
you given us
passed.
a citation of that Connecticut?
Right,
I can work with Megan
Yeah.
to.
Yeah,
to
we can
get
do that, and
information on
we can
that.
also hear
There-
from the
There may
agent.
not be much available outside of court filings at this point,
Yeah,
but I
right.
can
It's,
certainly
you know.
go back and look at section 8C.
Milwaukee also passed a captive audience law that was, I think, struck down in court. Wisconsin passed one that was challenged and they just decided we're not going to enact this or not going to enforce it. So
But there are other
this is not-
states that, I mean, Connecticut, was Connecticut the first state to
So,
pass
at-
the captive?
S-106 is based on Oregon's law. S-102 is based on a proposal from another state, and I can't remember which state. But, yeah, if we want to return to this, I can take a look at the NLRA provisions. And again, I can give you an evaluation of the law. I can't tell you how the case is going to come out.
Right, of
if it
course.
goes to the Second Circuit. Connecticut's instructive because when that goes up, presumably to the Second Circuit, that'll be binding precedent
Right.
for us here in Vermont. Even if the law is a little bit different. So there is that. I do see, I mean, if we're getting to the NLRA issue, I do have some concerns about the language in there about meeting political matters, including the decision of whether to join or support a labor organization. That gets directly to the heart of what's covered by the NLRA for most private employers in Vermont. That is, and I would argue there that we're potentially expressly preempted under the NLRA. So with that labor organization language, without getting into these other issues of employer First Amendment rights, I think that labor organization language by itself is potentially not enforceable. The rest of it, I can look at the case law and so forth. But until we see from the courts, because it is a fairly new issue, I'm not sure I can give you a conclusive answer on whether or not this will be struck down in court. I can tell you where the risks might lie.
Yeah,
But I think Megan's already highlighted some of the risks for litigation.
So
okay.
the real focus, at least through the testimony we've heard here, was from the labor unions. If in fact the NLRA is going to give us a problem with that, I haven't heard any testimony that we have a problem with employers bringing employees in to be proselytized by their marvelous pastor, or to be proselytized to support Ann Cummings on the next election. I mean, I don't know that we have a problem there.
Well, I think we heard that I thought we had heard that there had been people who were affected by this, so I would have to go back.
Yeah,
and
the
look at
ones I'm remembering are basically people, and I remember Rutland Hospital being mentioned particularly, that had people come in
Well,
and talk to them about the unions.
well, we also know that the national chains, like the home, the very religious, the right-wing home company, Hobby Lobby, right?
Which
We know about that
resulted in a
national-
brand new store at our mall.
Right, so, I mean, we know that that's been an issue here in Vermont. I mean, so I.
Well,
yes.
I haven't heard that testimony. That's not on the record.
So-
Yeah, I mean.
And if you have
the-
anything else you need.
Specifically, the political, I think that's stated, that is in 106, but not in 102, that, political organizations like religious organizations can talk about politics.
If you're
Certainly
employed
as
by
a
religious organization.
advocacy organization, when we hold a meeting with, like we had our recent forum with Senator Cummings, and I was there, and there were other employees of the state chamber that were there, and if they could say, well, I don't want to go to that, that's problematic. Or I think, for organizations that work in the political realm. So just
But they can choose to not go to that meeting as chamber members. They don't need to.
not members are employees.
Oh,
So
good.
the people who hand out
Passing very
the,
nice
yeah.
refreshments and signing people up. and
right.
Getting
Doing all the
quotes, they
organizing.
made me sound very smart.
Anything else, Megan, before we?
Yeah, well, I guess we do have some questions about who card check applies to in terms of private employers. And there are concerns about getting rid of the, getting rid of the opportunity for employees to vote on secret ballot is very concerning. We'll just speak to private employers on this. But the voice of an employee to say whether or not they want to participate in collective bargaining, if any union organizers are just going to someone's home, they can ask as many times as they want. And to get to that 50+1%, you are, there's potentially 49% of the employees that didn't get to weigh in. And even if in that balloting process they lost, they've at least been able to express their voice on where they stand on this. So removing that as a part of how a private business would go through the process of collective bargaining is a huge concern. And I think, we would, that it doesn't feel necessarily pro-worker to say we're going to get rid of the secret ballot opportunity. It feels more like a stand against the business. So quickly express our concerns.
Thank you for that. And James.
So very quickly, the state law touches primarily public employers with a very small number of private employers potentially covered. That anyone who's doing business that's in interstate commerce, so that touches tourists who are coming from out of state, who are shipping goods out of state, etc. They're covered by the NLRA, not the SLRA, the State Labor Relations Act. But the State Labor Relations Act could affect small businesses in the state that have 5 or more employees who are doing business that's entirely in Vermont. Right now, I don't think we have any employers unionized under the SLRA, but that's not to say we couldn't at some point in the future. It is possible. It's also possible that the interpretations of what interstate commerce is and the reach of the NLRA change at some point. But for right now, the vast majority of private sector employees are covered under federal collective bargaining law.
And they're already covered.
They are, and I'm not an expert on the NLRA, so I can't speak to what's permitted or not permitted under that without going back and doing some research.
But with respect to card check, for example.
I'd have to check what's permissible under the federal law.
Okay.
I have a feeling if it were allowed, it wouldn't be as big an issue as it is.
Well, it's difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we need to hear back from that because we need to turn we need to turn to our
Thank you
next
all.
issue. Thank you, Megan. Very helpful. Have you submitted your testimony electronically to Scott? Would you be kind enough to do that? That would be great.
And maybe 103 another. Thank you.
103. Yes, I don't know when we're next scheduled for 103. Tomorrow, I think. Yeah.
Yes.
Great, Damien, thank you. And more to follow. I think we have some follow-up questions here on AGN and stuff, whether we need to weigh in.
Yep, and I'll be listening in on S73 when that comes up, the workers' comp
Yeah,
with
great.
Director DeRocher, and if you want me to come down, Scott can just email me.
decide.
I'll be about 2 minutes
Okay.
away.
Great, terrific, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we are now going to turn to Vermont Saves. And Vermont Saves is in such capable hands. It's great to have you. Becky, I think we're gonna start with you on, and then we had talked about this bill. Mike, as our treasurer, has presented the concept of the bill. And I'm not sure we've done more than that. And you now have drafted it up. And that is what we have in front of us, I think.
Big bill for simple concept.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I can, so I guess, and
Can you give us the high
yeah, I
level,
was
because I'm
gonna
just
ask
trying
you
to,
one.
we have
go on.
25 minutes on this.
Okay.
If you'd be kind enough to give us the high level on this, then we can fill in with, oh, Greg is here via Zoom, and we have Gavin, and we have Ashlyn, and we have Chris. So I don't know if any of you are, you're not scheduled to testify, but if you may want to add some things, we would love to have it. So Becky, why don't you lead us through what we have in front of us?
Becky Wasserman, Legislative Counsel. So this is drafting request 230973. It is a committee bill, so it won't get a bill number until the
Right.
committee votes it out. This bill is creating in the state treasurer's office the Vermont Saves program, which is a program that would be offering access to retirement savings for certain Vermont covered employees who are working at companies that don't currently offer a retirement savings program. So it is creating a new chapter. There's quite a lot of detail in terms of the definitions and the requirements that go along with creating this program. So sounds like you just want an overview right now, if that.
I think it would be great if you could just sort of basically go through what each section does and
Sure. So,
move us through at a fairly high level. I think that would be great. And then we can go to Greg, and then we can have some discussion with the experts in the room.
I do need to leave by 10 of 12 because I think I'm
Yeah.
sharing money chairs today.
Yeah, and I have to leave also early.
Okay, and we have at 11:30, we have the firefighters bill. Okay,
That,
so
Sure.
we have until 11:30 on
Okay.
Vermont Saves.
So the new chapter 18 entitled 3, there is a section 531, which is the definition section, which has the relevant definition for creating the Vermont Saves program. I'll just highlight bottom of page 2, starting on line 15. There's a definition of covered employee, which is anyone older, 18 years or older, who is employed by a covered employer, which is on page 3, who has wages or other compensation that are allocable to the state during a calendar year. And then there's more details on what a covered employee does not include. And on page 3, a covered employer is any person or entity engaged in business or trade in the state. And it can be a for-profit or non-profit that has not offered to an employee or is within a group that maintains or contributes to is a specified tax favored retirement plan at any time within the current calendar year or 2 preceding calendar years.
Becky, when this says seasonal employee, is the farmer or the orchard owner who hires Jamaican agricultural workers in on a temporary visa?
For an H-2B visa.
Yeah, are they going to be required to take money out of that person's wages when that person may never come back to this country to work
I
again?
think it's a voluntary sign up, right? This isn't a
They can-
required sign up.
No, it was required, but then you could opt out, if I'm
Yeah,
remembering the
so-
treasurer.
I'll turn to page 6.
We already have a voluntary program.
That
Program.
creates the program. So this program allows an employee to contribute to an IRA and also requires that the employer offer it to the employee. But the
Okay,
the
so I
requirement-
don't, all right, the employer has to offer it,
Right.
but the employee does not have to sign up.
Yes, and
Okay,
that's my
that
understanding.
makes a lot more
Um,
sense than what I
right.
was hearing the treasurer say.
And H-2B visa may have its own whole set of
As
stuff.
long as
So I wouldn't-
anybody doesn't,
That's a
because if
federal.
you're at the low end of the wage scale,
Right.
that could be food in your family's mouths that you're
Okay.
taking away.
So let's go back to page where we were.
And in terms of seasonal, that's my understanding that it could include those.
Well, a
Right.
seasonal construction worker that drives a backhoe but is laid off 3 months of the year, or a legislative employee,
Right,
that's, as long as it's voluntary, that's fine.
which is, I think, what it is, required by the employer to offer voluntary to sign
Okay,
up.
we've got a hand up.
And
Yeah,
then-
oh,
I just wonder if I could just offer a minor point.
just identify yourself.
Gavin Boyles, Deputy Treasurer for the record. Just that the treasurer is empowered by the statute, by the bill to make rules
Yes,
on the
that's-
topic specifically of seasonal employees and how that all works. Understanding that it's complicated and presents a lot of things that we would need to hear from folks.
Yeah, I was gonna point that out too. I was just trying to find the page, but there is a section of the bill that provides that the treasurer has certain duties with respect to coming up with both adopting rules and guidelines and processes on a number of things to administer the program. And that is.
And they're coming back to us with that then?
It is not, it doesn't come back to the legislature. It is delegating
The responsibility,
the
of the rules and
authority.
guidelines. to
Yeah, the
treasurer.
authority.
Got
Go come to the legislative rules committee.
Right, got it. Thank you, Gavin.
And the chair in here will be asked if it meets legislative intent.
Right. Love those emails. Okay.
Emails.
We'll keep plowing through. Well, we get anyway.
That's
So, covered employees, we're,
Yes, so I'm just trying to highlight a few of the definitions. There, I think, one of the definitions is trust, and I'll get, there's language on that later, but the assets of the program are required to be held in a trust. And then there's
that's
certain,
held in the treasurer's office.
in a trust that is, has to meet certain federal requirements. So there's a number of federal laws that are implicated.
So this
through
would be
bill.
how, I assume, dealt with like a regular IRA, an IRA?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
there's,
It would be in
the treasurer on page 7, the type of IRA to which contributions are made shall be a Roth IRA. However, the treasurer is authorized to add an option for all participants to affirmatively elect to contribute to a traditional IRA instead of a Roth IRA.
Okay. Yes, and I remember that, because then if you did run on hard times, you could remove the principal without penalty.
And then, so section 532 is establishing the program, and this is really where most of the substance is. So
What page are you on now?
page
Oh,
6.
page 6.
So I went through, we're jumping around a bit. So I went through some of this, but the establishment is that the program is administered by the Office of the State Treasurer. And there's a purpose stated of increasing financial security for Vermonters by providing access to an IRA for Vermont employees of companies that do not currently offer a retirement savings program. And the program specifically is designed to facilitate portability of benefits through withdrawals, rollovers, and direct transfers from an IRA, as well as achieve economies of scale and other efficiencies to minimize costs. And then you'll see in subdivisions 1 and 2 is where there's that language I stated before, that it allows a covered employee to contribute to an IRA, and this may be done through a payroll deduction. And then it requires the covered employees to offer the choice to contribute to the employee. And then
And that's all under C, under contributions?
Sorry, this is page 6, subdivisions 1 and 2, just under the establishment of the program. So that's line 16 through
Right.
21.
Right. For that establishes the requirements offered in the, okay, great.
Okay, page 7, I went through the subsection B, which is the type of IRA, and then subsection C has information on the contributions. So a covered employee is automatically initially going to contribute 5% of the covered employee's salary or wages to the program. They may elect to opt out at any time or contribute at a higher or lower rate, expressed as a percentage of salary or wages, or as permitted by the treasurer.
Becky, just on that, maybe Gavin and Chris and Ashton have an answer on this. What is there an average percent of a employee's wage that is in for most retirement accounts or benefits?
I'm not aware of what that would be.
Is 5% roughly average for people who do have a savings plan?
It is probably a little lower than
That's what I thought.
average, except there's an average. I don't know that we've looked at that specifically, but if I had to guess, it would be
But you said
probably
it
more in the
somehow.
like sort of 7 to 10 range.
You chose to set it at 5, so I assume that you had some data behind setting.
Well,
it.
5, yeah, 5, I mean, just is something that's worked for other states, something that the research shows, gets people into the program without
Without
sort
it
of
being.
debilitating consequences on their
Okay.
personal finances.
Great, thank you.
And then subdivision 2 has the treasurer providing for an annual increase of each participant's contribution rate. I think there's a mistake here. It should say by not less than 1%, but not more than 8% of salary or wages each year. And it applies to all active participants, including those participants by default with an option to opt out. And the increase is also subject to IRA contribution and eligibility limits under the Internal Revenue Code. The
I
program,
don't know if I understand that provision entirely, just reading it very quickly. You can increase the rate on an annual basis uniformly. Does that mean that everybody's in at 5% initially who signs up? And next year, could the treasurer say, I'm going to raise that to 6%, and the 6% applies to everybody or only to the people who want to increase?
so I think that my reading of this is that the 5% is the automatic initial contribution,
Right.
but an employee could.
Yeah, it's the
decide.
employee individually makes the decision. It's not that the plan as a whole becomes a 6% plan. That's just what I want to clarify.
Captain
Yeah.
Wells again, just that the default would change, but there's always, the person always has full control over their contribution rate. They could change it to 1%, they could change it to 8%.
When you say the default changes, does that mean then in year 2, if you decided 6%, everybody entering the plan must go in at 6%?
Unless they opt out.
Or they can they go in at a lower rate, for example? Do they have that
It sounds like-
ability
Yes,
Good.
to select the rate, but just not more than 6%? Is that what that is
they
saying?
could even select more than 6%.
They
The
basically
individual
can
does.
select what they want.
Under the definition, I believe, of contribution rate.
This is
Now,
what I.
So on
remember saying.
page 7, line 8, it says a covered employee may elect to opt out of the program at any time or contribute at any higher or lower rate.
Okay, that's it. It's line 9 on page 7.
Right. Okay, because we need to hear from Greg and we have now 11 minutes.
So page 8, the treasurer can allow for direct deposits of contributions into the program. Subdivision 4 on line 5, a covered employer is not required or permitted to make a contribution. So it's the employee who makes the contribution. And then
Employer can't.
I thought that Mike said that the employer could. I thought that, did you hear that? I mean, I felt that,
I
no,
just
not ever.
wondered if there was a reason why we had to say an employer couldn't.
Gavin.
Gavin Wells again. If the employer were able to contribute, this entire construct would become subject to ERISA. And
Oh, okay,
much
got it.
more complicated.
Got it. So this is strictly an employee payment option.
Exactly right.
Got it. Okay, Becky, let's keep going because Greg,
Okay, I will try to
so the
give,
this is all the establishment of it through,
yeah, to the treasurer's office. So I just wanted to point out subdivision 5, it says that each participant owns the contributions to the amounts that they put into their account under the program, and that the state and the employers don't have any interest in those contributions or earnings. And then subsection D, I won't go into all these details now, but it just requires the treasurer to administer and implement the provisions of the chapter. So that is telling the treasurer to sort of design the program consistent with any federal law to the extent it applies. And the treasurer has to establish certain processes and requirements to administer the program. So there are a whole bunch of details about the kinds of things the treasurer will be doing to set this up, like processes for enrolling and making contributions to an IRA, phasing in enrollment of eligible individuals, ways for a participant to make non-payroll contributions to the accounts under the program. And I don't know if you want me to highlight all these, but
I would do big picture.
Okay.
Because we have, so it goes through, when we have the duties of the state treasurer, which are the rulemaking and the guideline establishment. And
yes, that's in the next section. I just, so page 11, subsection I, just want to highlight the program assets. Treasurer is authorized to establish a trust account to hold those assets. And there's, specific language in there that assets can be transferred to the general fund or any other fund of the state. And the contributions can only be used to pay benefits to participants and the cost of administration program. I wanted to highlight page 11, subsection J, fees, which goes to the top of page 12. Just that this does give the authority to the treasurer to charge a fee to defray program costs. So this is authorizing a fee to be determined by the treasurer's office.
to pay the treasurer.
So the treasurer may require the participants, may charge a fee to participants to administer the program.
And that will be part of the guidelines that we don't get to say yes or no to.
Yeah, so it says the amount and method of collection of such fee is determined by the treasurer.
Right. That's like, it would be maybe nice, instead of giving the treasurer carte blanche on that, to have a notion of the range that we might limit it to, so that, we're in GovOps, we're dealing with the sheriff's bill, which is sort of, has sort of aspects of this challenge here.
Would it be helpful to you to know the range of fees that all the other states are charging? Sort of.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful. I think to give you carte
Maybe,
blanche to
yeah.
set a fee that you get to keep and collect.
Say not to exceed.
Yeah, not to exceed, I think would be helpful.
Okay, I can get
That, if you could get that to Becky, that would be helpful.
And then page 12, section 533 is the duties of the state treasurer. So the treasurer is allowed to do a number of things, adopt rules to administer the program. The treasurer can enter into different contracts with both governmental entities, including other states, as well as any financial institutions, trustees, record keepers, investment managers, to be able to administer the program. The treasurer, so I'm on page 13, line 17, shall establish criteria and guidelines to offer qualified retirement and investment choices. And then there's language that the program has to be designed, established, invested, and operated in accordance with best practices for retirement savings accounts and to avoid preemption of federal law. The treasurer can apply for and accept for any grants for the program. They have to evaluate whether any insurance is needed. And there are a number of agreements the treasurer will enter into with the Department of Taxes to administer the program. Finally, page 15, I'll just note the treasurer has to, discharge their duties as a fiduciary with respect to the program and in the interest of the participants. Page 15, section 534 is creating the retirement security fund. So that fund would be administered by the state treasurer. Subsection B, line 19, it would consist of monies appropriated to the fund by the General Assembly and any monies transferred to the fund or any of the payments of fees, penalties, and other monies that go to the program, as well as any gifts, grants, or donations. And then all the interest and income is credited back to the fund, and any unexpended money remains in the fund. There's some penalties in section 535 if a covered employer fails to enroll an employee, and there's some maximums set out in statute about the penalty per covered employee, and those change by date. So the penalties increase the longer an employer waits to enroll an employee, offer the plan to an employee. The treasurer is on page 17, subsection B, authorized to establish rules for waiving these penalties.
Yeah, protect, then the next big,
Yeah, so page 18, section 536, there's some language on protecting an employer from liability. And then on page 19, there's language on protecting the state from liability from the program. And I'm just flying through this, but you
yeah,
can
no, this
stop me at any
is,
time.
well, we've got one good catch, and this is good, this is terrific, and this is just to get it launched into the House for the work,
So
which is what I think our objective is here.
Were there huge barriers to?
No, we just
Okay,
added,
okay.
no, we caught, well, I'll tell you in a second.
Okay, so, but, okay.
Because I get back.
Right, to do something huge, yeah.
And
section 537, confidentiality, so the treasurer has to come up with policies and procedures consistent with the Public Records Act to maintain confidentiality of participants' personal information. There are accounting and reporting requirements in section 538. So there's an annual reporting requirement from the treasurer to the legislature on the operations of the program. And then section 2 on page 20 is.
I'm just gonna flag, we probably want to get the report too, just because it's about like the economic well-being of Vermont.
exactly. Yep, that's a good flag. I think we would want that as well. And as would House Commerce.
Right.
There's some implementation.
Or general, anyway, we'll figure that out.
Okay. Implementation dates. So, beginning July 1st, 2025. I don't know what year it is. Covered employees with 25 or more
I think it should be
employers. Yeah, employers. See, have to offer the program to all covered employees. I think there's that mistake. I have to change this to
In the
covered
second one,
employers.
yeah.
Yeah.
So this is gonna take, Gavin, your notion is that it's gonna take us 2 years to get set up?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. great.
Yes, so the 15 to 24 employees by January 1st, 2026, and then 5 to 14 by July 1st, 2025.
Right.
And then there are some appropriations in section 3. So
Right.
750,000 from the general fund to the state treasurer to establish and administer the program. And any unexpended funds in FY24 would carry forward to FY25. And then in subsection B, the treasurer is authorized to establish 3 exempt permanent positions. Section 4 is repealing the Green Mountain Secure Retirement Plan that was first established in 2017 and then amended in 2019. So that's why there are 2 sections of law being repealed. And then section 5 is the effective date. So the act would take effect on July 1st of this year.
Great, and our time is tight. I don't know if Mike is
Just one
here.
quick question, and that is regarding the Green Mountain Secure Retirement Plan. Are there any positions associated with that?
Not sure.
The prior plan?
Yeah, the
No.
plan that we didn't act on or that we didn't end up setting up. So how many positions had you asked for as we set that up?
I believe none were authorized. I'm not sure what the dynamic was as far as.
And maybe that's why it never took
Yeah.
flight.
Could be.
No positions, no
I
program.
have heard words to that effect.
So there's no account or anything, no
No.
accounts.
No, so this is replacing that goal of setting up a retirement account for people that don't have one. Chair, you're back.
Yes.
And Greg, we have
thank
not
you,
heard from
Madam
Greg
Vice Chair. Okay. Greg, it seems like you've been very patient. I haven't been here.
Becky, thank you. That was,
Thank you, Becky.
What am I?
Do you think, Greg, like five minutes is enough? We're just,
I have some brief remarks and I can go pretty quickly.
thank you.
and would you be kind of send them to us, Greg, also?
I sent them yesterday and Scott has them.
great,
so you're all
okay.
set. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'll just take a little bit of your time. Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Greg Marshall and I'm the State Director with AARP Vermont. And on behalf of our 112,000 members, I appreciate the opportunity to testify in strong support of the Vermont Saves Retirement Program. As you know, we're a non-profit, nonpartisan organization. We're dedicated to empowering Americans over 50 so that they can live their own best lives. And in order to do that, being able to be financially secure in retirement is obviously critical to that desire. Saving for retirement is one of the most important things anyone can do for their future. And BT Saves actually offers an easy way for employees without access to a workplace plan to grow the savings they need to help secure their own retirement. Americans are 15 times more likely to put money away for retirement if they have a savings account at work. Yet 40% of Vermont private sector employees work for a business that do not offer a workplace plan. So that leaves about 88,000 Vermonters behind, and that is frankly to us unacceptable. This gap contributes to the growing crisis of Vermonters who lack sufficient savings for retirement and emergencies. Vermonters' lack of savings is a crisis across the board, yet racial disparities are still quite striking here. In Vermont, Black workers are half as likely to be covered by a workplace retirement plan than their white counterparts. To reduce wealth gaps and barriers to economic mobility, we need programs like BT Saves, and we need them now. While Social Security is a critical piece of this puzzle, it is alone not enough to provide a strong financial future, nor was it ever intended to be a pure retirement program at its inception. The average Social Security benefit for a 65 plus Vermont family is only about $21,000 per year, even though these families spend almost $33,000 on things like food, utilities, and healthcare alone. BT Saves will lead to greater economic security for Vermonters as they age, relieving the pressure on social safety net programs and family members who would otherwise have to fill that gap. 16 other states have adopted legislation that helps employees save their own money for retirement as they work, and we urge Vermont to join them by passing and implementing BT Saves. If passed, I want the committee to know that AARP Vermont is committed to working with the Treasurer's Office and other stakeholders to support a strong public engagement and outreach program on VT Save so that we can maximize the impact of the program and get as many people understanding why it's so valuable to be a part of it. I want to thank you for allowing me to testify today, and I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Greg. That was extremely helpful. In fact, whoever reports this bill might borrow a little bit from your statistics, if that's all right.
Or a lot. But that, it's helpful. Thank you for saying that you are committed to partnering with the
Yeah.
Treasurer's Office to message and market this because, and it's not necessarily your cohort, but it's your future cohort that this needs to be marketed to. So it needs to be the 20-year-olds who are beginning work, who are really needing to, engage
There's
with
no
this.
question.
as you-
If you look at the data and for folks that begin saving between 20 and 30 years old as a part to start saving between 30 and 40, just a small amount, those numbers are catastrophically different. So helping people understand that is critical. And just on behalf of our members, we have a lot of folks between 50 and 60 years old who are now figuring out ways to care for their own parents, put their kids through college, and don't have a vehicle to save through their workplace. So we feel strongly about that group of folks as well.
Yeah, just one, thank you very much. It's great data. And then I always just think about how pensions used to be the norm and now they're not. And I think that's worthy of note in the explanation of the need for this program.
Yes.
I think that is an absolutely essential and critical point. They are simply not there like they used to be, and there are very few left. We consider a strong Social Security program, a strong Medicare program, workplace savings, and personal savings as the four rungs to a strong retirement stool, if you'll allow me that image. And all four of them have to be working in conjunction with each other to make sure that Vermonters are going to have that kind of retirement when they're out of their peak earning years.
Well,
No, it's
thanks,
true.
thanks so much, Greg. We are a little bit over time, but that was extremely helpful and succinct, and we appreciate it. And maybe we'll see you at the press conference for this bill next Tuesday with the Treasurer's Office and hopefully many members of our committee.
Yeah, it would be great if you could join us at that.
I look forward to being there.
Okay.
And I want to
Great.
also
Thank you
thank this committee for taking such quick action on this bill. Really, really appreciate it. I know there's a lot going on, so thank you, Chair, and the rest of the committee for working so quickly and diligently on it.
Thanks so much, Greg.
Thank you very much. I'll see you next week.
Right. So we will vote on this bill on Friday, and I don't think we, actually, we have this up for a vote on Thursday, so we can hopefully get one bill out of the way on Thursday.
So the one piece Gavin and Becky are working on is setting, in the bill, it talks about the treasurer being able to set their own fee.
Okay,
And we asked for a not to exceed.
okay.
So they
So
can,
not to exceed, a report coming to our committee too, that would
right, and
change.
in-house, whichever the appropriate committee is, in-house general or house commerce, one or the other.
I'm not gonna guess, but Becky will.
House Commerce.
Yeah,
Yeah.
house commerce, I
Yeah.
think would be good.
Perfect, that sounds, so we'll have those pieces and a vote on Thursday.
Which is tomorrow.
That's tomorrow, yes. And it's set for an hour, so we can discuss more.
This is set for now?
Yeah, we might steal some time there, actually.
Yeah.
If
A lot of
people,
time.
unless something blew up today, actually, maybe, That
Some of the
means-
some of the 102,
I
106.
think one or
Yeah.
two, it needs more work. Megan's testimony, you will.
well, and I was gonna say, that might, do people feel like we still meet at 8 and then take another half hour there? Or we meet at 8:30?
The question is, do we have anybody else testify?
We have
on the
people-
schedule at this point?
We have more people who've asked to testify, and we
Employers.
might have people who wanna counter testify, so I think we might still need to meet at 8.
Yeah.
Okay, but we'll take a half hour if people don't feel like anything's.
I'm
gonna
still
blow up.
adjusting to daylight saving.
So maybe
Right.
8:30,
Yeah,
if that's. okay.
No, I know, we're saying
We'll
8
do it.
because
We'll-
we have, I know that other
8,
people will
8:30
wanna
is.
testify. I want to keep it at 8 because I do think.
I think
Right.
the snow is
Right.
finally
Yeah.
supposed to end, so
Yeah.
you might get a safe ride and not
Um,
take a half hour cleaning the car off.
Okay, but we'll probably maybe steal a half hour, maybe 40 minutes from this issue tomorrow if people feel like those small changes that they're ready to vote.
I think this is very solid.
Yeah.
Great,
This
okay,
is-
great. Mike, thanks so much for your patience.
You're welcome.
Sorry to be late.
Good morning.
Good morning. So we're jumping to S73, firefighter workers comp, and hoping that you've seen the latest draft with a study on equipment and screening. Is that on our website?
This is draft 1.1 that we're looking at.
I don't think
Is that right?
there's so many. Picture right now.
We have on our desks this morning is S73 draft 1.1. And
Right.
Damien is going to be joining us. He is there by Zoom. So Damien, we assume.
Yes,
this
that
our
is
latest
correct. Draft 1.1 from March 13th, 3:32 PM. It looks like a
March 13th.
Yeah, it's a strike off.
Yeah, okay. This, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
4 pages. It was on our desks as of before the break.
No. 313 was just 2 days ago.
Oh, okay, right.
Chair,
Sorry,
might it
okay.
be,
Where do I need to go?
Sorry?
might it be possible, Chair, to receive a copy of this latest draft? I don't have the latest
Yes.
draft version.
Yes. Our
Thank
committee
you.
assistant Scott Moore is emailing to you.
Okay, thank you.
But you can start generally, I suppose, until this new draft, basically, I can just tell you, makes one change that is similar to a House provision in their version of the bill that allows you to be screened and get it all clear when you are serving as a firefighter and still be eligible later on if you get a cancer diagnosis. And then it has a report back from your division, because we heard so much about when are people getting these screenings? How much do they cost? Is that a hazard that volunteer firefighters are taking on while they're trying to fundraise for screenings? And do they, what's going on with equipment and gear and how up to date it is? We just heard a lot of concerns around that. So you might want to look at the study language when you get that copy, but I guess if you could start with the general concepts of the bill as you understand.
Okay, for the record, I'm Mike DeRocher. I'm the Executive Director for the Division of Fire Safety. And I'm trying to see where you are here can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay, so something's going on with my screen here, so I can't see you. So typically the Division of Fire Safety is on the prevention side of stuff, right? So we have fire service training, and with fire service training, we do cancer prevention strategies in our training. So I have not reviewed the latest draft of this bill, but let me start out by saying from the administration's perspective, the administration strongly supports gender equity, right? And is really trying to understand the cancer impact between the career firefighters and the volunteer firefighters. So that is a point of view that I wanted to bring up from the administration's perspective. As far as cancer at the national level, this is at the forefront of the fire service organizations. It is well known that the career departments have much more resource capability to do the research study. It's very difficult for the volunteer fire service to do research on cancer in volunteer firefighters, although there are a number of networks out there that are doing research on volunteers. It's just a little more difficult. Funding is not readily available, right, to assist the volunteers versus funding available with the larger career organizations. So I wanted to mention that. And I still haven't had the opportunity to review this latest draft. So if you bear with me just a minute, I can pull this up and look at it.
And I think luckily the changes besides what you've discussed already are highlighted. So it's a small highlighted sentence and then the highlighted report at the end.
Yep. Equipment upgrades. Okay. Okay, as far as the study goes here, this is the first I've seen this. So the projected cost of the state to fund annual or biannual cancer screenings for all professional and volunteer firefighters. We can assist in coordinating that. Project costs fund cancer screening for all enrollees in the Vermont Fire Academy Firefighter 1 program. We can do that. Potential opportunities for the state to reduce the cost for fire departments to provide annual cancer screening. We can do this. The project cost for the state to fund replacement of personnel protective equipment. Yeah, so I don't see any major issues there with the Division of Fire Safety facilitating study to report back to the legislature on those particular matters. We have a strong connection with our fire service organizations and we can facilitate that.
Right.
Great. Okay.
That's terrific.
I mean, while we have you, I'll just say the only other flag we received that might be worth us having discussed before we take this to the floor is, you know, that a lot of volunteer firefighters are over 65 years of age and might not have had the opportunity to get that kind of cancer screening before. I mean, you know, so is that provision about firefighter under 65 years of age, is that pretty standard? If we change that, are we kind of opening a huge can of worms? Or do you have any thoughts on, you know, the reality of the age of our volunteer firefighters and how that?
The reality is we have a number of volunteer firefighters, probably over the age of 65, that are still actively participating in the fire service, whether they're still in leadership roles and so forth. So the number, I couldn't even begin to provide that data for you, but with my affiliation with the fire service, there's certainly a number of volunteers over the age of 65 for sure.
Yeah, I mean, oh, okay.
I think I'm chairing.
Okay, great. So we're losing Senator Cummings.
Yeah, I'm gonna be gone in about 2 or 3 minutes.
Well, it's a good, so right now, the bill's in good shape. It sounds
Yeah,
like.
so just the question for me is it fair to exclude those?
Right. I think,
No,
yeah, I mean.
Okay.
I don't
then-
think it's,
We don't have a vote on this until Friday. You know, I mean, we're hearing from the fire safety perspective and the work you do and the people you work with. It feels unfair. I think
Yeah.
if we change that, we're gonna have,
It'll be more expensive.
It'll be more expensive. We're gonna have someone come in and say it's more expensive. Maybe the Department of Labor would be the people to come back in on that front. So we could say that, you know, we take a little bit more testimony on that before we vote on that issue. Yeah.
Mike, would you be kind enough to remind us of the numbers of volunteer firefighters in the state and the career? As I recall, it's like 500. The possible, they're very, I mean, huge difference. So like 500 career, I just don't have it in front of me. And
No,
then
I
like
don't.
10,000.
I don't have the exact numbers. What I can
But it's
tell
something
you,
like
there's roughly 250 to 270 likely career full-time. And then maybe 4,000 roughly
it's more like
volunteers,
5,000.
somewhere in that ballpark. We have 12 female firefighters on the career side, and tracking female firefighters on the volunteer side is difficult. So I can't
Yeah, we
speculate
have
how many.
more and more. More and
Excuse-
more.
Senator Harris, just to let you know, I had a concern about us being able to reach the volunteers because some of them aren't associated with the town, but the Labor Department got back to me and said that all of the volunteers are covered by workers' comp.
Okay, so there's no little pocket of
Right.
people. that-
So we can find people and they are covered already.
We did that a couple of years ago when Ernie Shand was in the.
And I think,
Good.
I think the fire service too had maybe recommended that you hear testimony from a couple other people that had expertise in this area. Also, I'm not sure if any of the insurance providers have provided testimony here or not yet. But I just wanted to raise that because I was questioned about it. So
Can you
there are-
Can you name one? I don't know if we,
Could you support, we could,
if Scott emails you, could you give him a contact? Because that might be the person we ask about the age change.
Yeah, I think Chris Doolby, the president of the Professional Firefighters Organization, may have sent some names already
Okay, we'll check on
that we
that.
can.
insurance company. Check in.
That's what he's saying.
And it might be VLCT and their insurance component.
VLCT maybe would,
They didn't want to weigh in, so we'll have to ask them.
that's right. That's right. I remember that.
Okay, so we will try to hunt that down for the final vote on Friday. Mike, anything else that you wanted to say before we?
No, I would just say that the cancer at the national level is a very hot topic, and with an emphasis on research. And what I would say here is on the volunteer front, there is a national firefighter registry program run through the CDC. And, you know, at some point here, there should be an effort to register our firefighters in that program. And then the state here through the Department of Health has a cancer registry program, and those two systems can talk to each other. So maybe in 10, 15 years from now, we can do a better job at tracking and researching occupational exposure to carcinogens within the emergency services. So there are ways that we can help facilitate future discussions in this arena here. And we can, here at the Division of Fire Safety, we can be probably be a catalyst to some of those future discussions.
Great. So you don't need us to put that in language.
No.
We'll do that.
No,
The one thing we might think about doing is adding measurable data that should be collected to your study. And you could be adding that in the work that you're gonna do on the, already in this study. It's both equipment and data collection, because we'd have to start collecting that data right away. I mean, for it to be useful in 10 or 15 years.
right. The problem is too, collecting all this data is that not all firefighters are members of the Vermont State Firefighters Association. So we don't capture all the volunteer firefighters. We capture a lot of them, but we don't capture everybody. If you're not a member, we don't have the records. So
What percent of our volunteer base are members?
I don't want to guess on that, but off the top of my head, there are people at VSFA You may want to reach out to Dean Gilmore, who was the government affairs officer there. There's probably a pretty high percentage are members, speculating 80% maybe in that range. But don't quote me on that. That's just off the top of my head.
Last week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. This is extremely helpful. Mike, while we have you, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I just want to say you are named in a study about fire safety and meeting the energy code that has now come out of Senate Natural Resources, attached to our bill S100. You may have been briefed on that. Did you, I mean, we're gonna, but I might want to get you on the record now because we're gonna hear the amendment soon, and I just wanted to have heard you while we have you and we have an extra few minutes. If you're, I mean, in general, if you want to say we just don't have more time, or, you know, we don't know, and we don't know right now, either way, you know.
So can you just help us understand what he's named and what piece of this?
It's only if he, you know, if he's aware of it, which,
Are
you know.
you aware of this?
I found out about this 20 minutes ago. So I would
Okay.
prefer not, I'd prefer not to comment on that. I haven't even read it. But I know
If you
this
could
is something new. So I haven't even read the amendments to S100.
If you could send us written comments when you feel prepared to do that, that would be helpful.
Okay.
Thank you, because we'll just have to consider that quickly, as you will too. So even they can be very brief, but that would be helpful. Thanks so much, Mike. I think we'll end a little early and
Right.
start at 8 a.m. tomorrow.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.